This is a basic response to Look Auto Top Technologies. They have less than 5,000 subscribers, so have fun with that. I mean, even smaller channel. Anyways, new technologies 2023. The W piston Toyota, which is literally just a linear generator strapped with an air spring to the rear. A linear generator is a coil of copper and a neodymium or some other magnet. Then there's the free piston engine, which is what it starts off with because it's technically speaking the only one, which is essentially two of the Toyota's W piston engine, which is a linear generator engine again, but slightly different in that I'll get to why it would basically need to be completely redesigned if you're ever going to actually use it. And then what is effectively one of the worst designs ever for a dual chamber engine I've ever seen. I don't know how it managed to get anywhere, but it's the Aquarius engine that it ends with. Okay, and it's like I'll get to each one of those first and foremost free piston engine because I already have these on my YouTube and I've been talking about it for by myself and designing and reiterating with various issues I've had with every one of them over like the course of a year basically. Even talked to my therapist about it, talked about it on my streams and uh, you know exported the streams to my YouTube. So the free piston design is one of the stupidest designs, pure and simple, because the seals will always fail. The air spring in the center never maintains. Combustible gases go around the rings. They have to go somewhere. They block the seals and they clog up. They get hot. The rods always expand. Increased friction has thermal losses. It's never inherently balanced. It's literally the stupidest way to go about making the engine. You have to have dual combustion chambers like the Aquarius, but in an entirely different way. You have got to remove any air spring idea as being something you could actually use. You have to cool it with oil, which is a shock version. So it's like you're going to use a spring and shock. The combustion chambers on both sides are now your springs. The shock is in the center. It moving from one side or another when it gets to the right place will allow for, when combustion has occurred, to have bleeding opportunities for the seals. Now, the seals are simple enough to take care of. Don't use fully sealed seals. Simple, easy enough to understand. Never use them. You can never use fully sealed seals. That's why I use a three-part design with piston rings. The piston rings will gather oil where they are. They move basically a little bit. They create incredibly high PSIs that they have to get around. So long as the rod itself is tapered correctly, the tolerances always maintain themselves. And now there's a bleeder system at the top, or anywhere, for the oil. The oil can be cooled. Simple and easy because it's a pump in its own right. When you have another spring on one side versus the other, you've doubled your effective spring rate. You scavenge effect both of them, use the momentum and the intake on one side and to decrease resistance on another, and you get a constant, always there streaming of air and fuel getting burnt and combusted. Now it's been balanced. Finally. Now it's cooling. Because of course the oil can go around the cylinders and you can cool the oil. You can also drop in oil at the seals in the middle. By having that ultimately act like a oil squirter. And then drop it at the bottom. That's all you gotta do. But it's like all it needs to do is open during when the pressurized process fires oil into the ring area and then fires any leftover out at the bottom. Simple and easy. All you need is basic ring valves. They slide and then they continue rotating, and then they'll slide open, they'll continue rotating, and do the same constantly, and it always works. It still eats some oil, but way less than this fucker will. It's actually a viable engine now. This thing will always break. This fucker could never run at the RPMs or the thermal efficiencies or anything that it claims to run at. Mine, on the other hand, will. Because I have 4 fucking goddamn combustion chambers that are 2-stroke scavenge, which is effectively like a fucking inline 8. For the amount of extra energy I'm putting in, I can increase the degree of stroke and reduce the piston, in between, and have that become far more efficient as having several links, like a shock does, of cores of magnet as they go through and oppose backwards and forwards its continuation, thus balancing it. I also increase the surface area for the linear generation, and I make more electricity, all while having an active pumping system that works just fine. So it's like, I never did it though, because the moment I was like, wait, I can make a top and bottom, just opposed piston this shit. This is stupid. Just fucking make an opposed piston. You have a center and then you have an outside combustion chamber. You have 3 combustion chambers for a single cylinder. I have a way to force in all the amount of electricity, thermoelectric, thermophotovoltaic, piezoelectric, oil, cooling, all the rest. This is all my design. I already have this several times on my YouTube. You know what I mean? Like, this is simple and easy shit. It's like, why do I need to worry about blow-by? I don't. Why do I need to worry about cooling? I don't. You know what I mean? Like, I can cool that. Nothing says I can't cool that. Materials can easily handle that. There's nothing saying I can't handle this. And the W piston is another version of the same fucking problem. Look at me! Pressure regulation valve! This is my fancy way of getting around the overheating and cooling problem. You didn't get around the seals. The O-rings always die. They're fucking abysmal, man. They're abysmal. I have to constantly replace this. The friction coefficient problem, they'll break down so fucking much. 5,000 miles I have to replace a ring, an oil fucking ring, an O-ring, to make this work. I have to get massive pressures to make it so I can actually run at the compression ratios I want. I have to fucking do a 2-stroke. I don't even get the full stroke duration. I have to hope my timing maintains itself so that way the intake doesn't have a problem. It gets hot, I have to cool it way more. It becomes far less efficient as a linear generator because it's not separated nearly enough from the heat components and the friction components. It never works well. Aquarius engine, same problem. Look at this! I'll fucking suck in air and blow it, and I can use scavenge effects. Okay, you have tolerance issues. Easily. No matter what you're fucking saying. The tubes are having massive tolerance issues. They'll get hot, no matter what. Your exhaust is always going to fail. If you want to actually make that work, you have to attach it to something. Because you don't have linear generators. But it's like, okay, you put it on linear generators. Same issues. Not to mention, I have to increase the length of my actual engine massively because of these double tube problems. Look at this stupid fucking shit. I have to cool it. How am I gonna cool the exhaust? I'm not cooling the exhaust. Why am I cooling? You know what I mean? Like, tolerance means greater degrees of friction. I have to fucking lubricate that somehow. You know, if I'm gonna attach it to something that's gonna rotate a fucking anything, huh? You do realize the problem here. I have to cool that. I have to seal that. I have to fucking attach the gears. I have to make them strong. All of it. All of it does not work. It fails constantly. I can guarantee you this fucker is having those same problems I did when I started designing it in my head. Saw every one of those issues. Like, these guys are idiots. They'll call me an idiot like it won't wear blah 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 as if you know things, and I'm like, let's talk to an actual engine designer and watch as they fucking know these same issues will crop up no matter what. Not to mention, you have to somehow, some way repair and maintain this fucker. This is not easy to take apart. There's no fucking way. I'll have to split it in half. I get constant, never ending tolerance problems, large amounts of thermal problems, less and less actual horsepower and torque. I have to extra cool everything. It's all doable, but it's not worth it. The tube gets hot, the seals fucking die. They get gunked up with carbon, they're not going to lubricate. The tolerance fails eventually. Everything about this engine fucking suffers from its very design. It's not simpler. It's worse. To fix everything as is for the Aquarius engine, you have to basically redesign how all things with your manufacturing work. You have to add on so much shit for it to even properly cool itself, to transfer energy in any aspect. And oh, you forgot the other issue, the bigger elephant. You can't run high compression ratio. In fact, you can't run any efficient compression ratios at all with this. Your scavenging effects are a way to get around that very problem. None of these are good engine designs. I started with these as my basic engine designs and reworked them into proper engine designs that will work, are easy to manufacture, can be done soon, do not require so much research and development that they ultimately cost so much and are no longer what they touted, that mean that they can't be useful or even reasonable to even try and research and develop. Mine are, theirs are not. Yo, yourself somewhere else, bitch. Stop screaming. Like, I know for a fact your shit is bad. I started with the same issues. I thought about this the same way. Maybe it'll mean something. Maybe it'll work. Maybe something, blah, blah, blah. It's not. It's not going to. I completely redesigned all of it. They're all in my YouTube channel for a reason. None of them are very good. In fact, all of them are pretty much shit. If we're being really fucking direct about it. They suck. And they have other issues, for what it's worth. They can work for a while, but they're not worth it. If you're honestly looking for a small little fucking compact, very high reliability, insanely high amount of power and torque, you can look directly at my little toroidal engine. It's like, I have a basic bitch heat exchanger hydraulic fluid with a standard hollow, like them, piston rod. It's connected. But you know what works? Is that it's a tube within a tube within a tube. It's a several tube design. And it's like, why do you have a heat exchanger for this hydraulic fluid? Because it's like the hydraulic fluid's going to be pumped. It's going to look like your forearm. So you get your wrist and you get the two bones that go to your elbow. Alright? That increases the length of the lever. The hollow part, where the air goes through, is still right there. And you still have a jacket of hydraulic fluid that's going to be pumped from that around it. And then you have fuel towards the wrist that gets added and then pumped in. The donut's a two-piece donut. It's still bolted together, but it's what it is. It's fit to allow for compression as it turns counter-rotational style. I have two of those levers. Alright, but it's not really. It's all technically one, except for the fact the rotation, alright, of this hydraulic fluid is then added in after a clutch happens to have had it spin up like a coupler, thus giving it momentum and acting as if it has 2 times the length. Constantly. And if you don't know how that works physics-wise, I guess I'm going to have to get into math. There's springs. As they rotate and they have like the bicep. You tense your bicep and someone's trying to pull on your wrist. And then the other one's basically the other way. You have a trapezoid, someone's trying to pull on your wrist. They're like springs, except, of course, they're not. They have a continuation of momentum. And they have a continuation of that given amount of stress being able to act onto the crankshaft, which is hollow, by the way. It sucks in air. Sucks in air for the Ram turbo supercharger effect. Sucks in air into that manifold and then flings it from a wider down to a smaller base, which then goes into the manifold for the donuts, which are a two-piece donut, which have some bearings along the side, which they only need to hold them, okay? As they rotate, it's the arms that do all the heavy lifting to the crank. Perfectly balanced in every way. Counter rotates. I have that length, and then I have all of the double-sided as it moves, kind of like a figure 8. So it goes out, and then back in, and then out, and then back in. So it's like, take top right, goes in to bottom left, from bottom left up towards center, diverts off towards top left, back towards bottom center. And when it does that, it creates a very consistent increase of length, like a lever. But I still have the lever that is the very crank arm itself attached to the center manifold. And it's still getting bearinged, cooled. I have coolant that's going off to the radiator. Remember that? There's a radiator there. I have to remember the heat exchanger? There's hydraulic fluid that cools the hydraulic fluid. That's the lever. And I still need that to come in from where it gets cooled off into the manifold. And then it gets diverted off. There's still a fluid exchanger heater from the center of the tube, goes up, and it has to come back down. Up and comes back down, up and comes back down, up and comes back down. Why would I do that? Pretty simple. I want to cool it. This is engine coolant. Water to water heat exchangers still exist. Hydraulic fluid to hydraulic fluid heat exchangers still exist. So do air to air. They're called intercoolers. So, basically, it works. Now, the basic simple physics is that I have a spring and a constant momentum flow. That acts like a torque converter, which isn't really totally technically a torque converter. As it goes up, it then has to curve in and gets yanked back down. And then it flows back up, it goes up, and it curves back in. And I have 12 of those fuckers for 12 different areas. I have scavenge effects. I can rotate this perfectly balanced, counter-rotatedly. Or I can do one single one with a single statically fixed one. I do counter rotations because it's like, well, you want it to be small and compact and have insane amounts of torque. 2 counter rotations means I can spin it faster. Means I can have more torque, more leverage across the entire axle. I can cool it every which way you think. I can inject, because it's spinning, with a part of the donuts for the toroidal engine, with a sliding valve as it rotates. Let a little bump stop. Oh, what do you know? It's open. Fires in fuel. I have a bunch of air I can put it in. Put in there, not put it in. As I go through. I have a large amount of torque. No longer do I need it to be to increase torque. I don't have to go insanely far to get a bigger and bigger lever. Although I'm still going to have to do that, because there's only so far you can go with that. But now I have a much smaller, immediately balanced, immediately cooled, immediately everything better than all of these engines possible engine. Ignition is easy. I mean, there's a gap, man. If there's a double fucking toroidal, which isn't really, it's a part together, pieced together toroidal. You know what I mean? It's a gap. Put some insulation there. It rotates. What's this, a coil and a magnet? Spark. Easy. I can always use compression if I want to, by injecting fuel after. I can do both. There's nothing saying I can't. Perfectly inherently balanced. Fewer moving parts. Lubricated constantly. Cooled air. It's small, compact. Beats these fuckers all day, every day. It's not even difficult to manufacture. It's super easy. It's an engine block that you stick together. You make sure the rear is sealed off to the air. You allow the air to bounce off from the intake manifold over through the tubes back towards the intake. There you go. You have a constant continuation of recirculational pressure. That's a good thing. You want that. It means continuous movement. Stick a little thing in between for stators, like the standard, prop engine designs that have these little stators behind the props. Next thing you know, because it's acting like a shroud, makes it far, far easier to maintain the continual efficiency of increased pressures for the given design. And it maintains its cool. It's a beautiful little design. Really is. I mean it. It looks stunning. It's effectively just a cone that sticks into a little diamondish shaped scramjet intake, goes off, compresses it, and shoves it into its little intake manifold, and then constantly recirculates that towards the rear as it goes back in. You can go faster and faster because it's inherently balanced, and it has way larger degrees of torque than you think, because I have 12 rods, and then each one of those effectively has a double length rod attached to it. Do you not know how physics works? That would not be... There's a clutch, you dumb. Momentum gets added in like a torque converter retard, because it's ultimately like an hourglass shape, idiot. Then there's stators in between, stupid. Which means as they counter-rotate, they suck it in, blow it over, it sucks it in and blows it back down. Curves it back into the manifold, dummy dumb. I'm more efficient in all aspects. You want to know how to make a turbo? Here's a fucking goddamn rod. Here's a bifurcation. for your two turbos for the exhaust. Make them equal length tube headers, which is fucking phenomenally easy to do. But here's an even better one with my turbine designs. Goes in from the inside and then blows outwards. Once it spins it up on the inside, it creates little moments like the sliding valves, opens it up, creates a spin, then it goes down and then back towards where the exhaust is supposed to go in the rear of the vehicle. I can put two of those into one. It goes right into your little catalytic converter. Pretty simple stuff. It's kind of like a Pelton, if we're being honest. Goes in, it has a manifold pressure now. As it spins, it then is able to be released out into the full body. The body in the rear and the body in the front are the only two real places it can really reasonably allow for exhaust to come out, since it's got to have a center where it's connected. That then goes down to the rod, where the bottom main one, which is just a longer version of a standard Pelton, hey, remember, goes in from the side and then it comes out the middle, same thing. Don't have to reinvent any wheels here. Then stick that from that rod T-joint, basically, two of them, into the fucking goddamn little scramjet spinny. Sucks it out, blows it out, just like any centrifugal. Then it takes that with a spinning degree of blades with some stators, goes from a larger back into a smaller. Make a ram air, suck in air from underneath or above or off to the sides, away from where the radiator is. Cool with the water to air exchanger behind that, where the air intake ultimately gets sucked back in from the air that's recirculating in the design. And then the stators are also another water to air, because you can just feed in water to cool that. Simple and easy stuff. Seals don't break. Bearings are few, and so fewer moving parts. Less to fail. Easy to replace. I can easily and then I'll just change out the bearings, pop another one in. Simple. Oh, hydraulic fluid. Psh, just drain it. Put some new in. Put some new hydraulic fluid in. Everything's cooled with hydraulic fluid and water, or coolant really, for water to air exchangers, but sure, basically. Works just fine. For record, I do want a job, just so everybody's clear with that, but nobody's probably willing to hire me. It's just basic, simple, easy design. It's easy as hell to manufacture. It's literally just some milling techniques. I got a hole there. That's fluid, that's air. Just make sure it starts low and it goes up high, and then you gotta have the right little bump stops in between the two. So it's that's just a little, rod there that's just like camshaft. It's polished, it goes over, it pushes in. Hey, I got fluid! Any kind. Do you want air? Do you want fuel? Put it connected to the rear donut half. Stick a little other rod that allows you to change timings. It's like it activates it a little sooner or a little later. Here's your spark. Here's your gap changes. This is another simple, sticks in a little bit further, sticks out a little bit further. It then allows for connection for this long, this soon, so on. Fully mechanical practically, but it uses an electronic actuator or hydraulic, depending on what you want to do. Pretty simple stuff. Balanced super well, so 1,000,000 RPM for me is what I tout. Although it's really 1.1, but I'd never let people go to that fucking goddamn level of RPM. People don't understand why. It's you do realize, right? There's this thing called like a flywheel battery, and the faster it spins, the worse it becomes for you because materials like to go explosions. Tiny, subtle little balances no longer subtle. But it's like, why would I need it? I could run this thing at like 7, 10K and easily get you ridiculous horsepower and torque figures. And it would be small. Like, honestly speaking, it'd be pretty fucking small. My standard is a 49cc. If you can't figure out how to get the most out of a 49cc to the point where you make big boy engines cry and weep over how pathetically limp and weak they are, you're not doing your job right. Look at these ginormous honkers. They're worthless, useless, too big, so much weight. Cube law theory says you're worthless. Where's your power to weight ratios, huh? How come you're not efficient, eh? How come you don't capture your freaking efficiencies properly, eh? Which, by the way, this is basically just another version of the same thing for my torque converter setup. So it's like, this is a torque converter coupler that I just dump into the axle from the exhaust. So like as the exhaust spins this, it's like, this is my like clutch limiter. It's like, oh, anything past this means it's spinning this fast, so it just goes and dumps it right. It has to be attached in line with the hub. So it's like, oh, it's going to spin that faster, right? And it's like, fuck it. Let's just spin it faster. Let's just spin the axle faster. Like, I don't want this parasitic loss just fucking, around. Like, screw this. Like, I can always have it be the clutch that ultimately only engages once it hits so and such and such pressures. You know what I mean? So that way it's like it's tied to pressures instead of RPM, but, whatever. It doesn't really matter because it's like, well, screw that BS, man. Like, I want that exhaust doing work for me. That thing isn't doing work. I want my torque and I want my horsies. Where are my watts? I want watt hours, motherfucker. Where's this electricity gonna go? I'm not gonna build this with a freaking electric motor. This is annoying me. Although I could do that, it's just in the donut area because that'd be simple. You know what I mean? Because it'd be like two halves of a donut stuck together. And then you can even put it into the donut itself as long as it has the electrical contacts. So it's in like the housing and the donut part can then both be like a radial axle flex style. You just have to have the right coils and so on. But, it's just like, screw it. Direct mechanical. Conversions are losses. I don't want electricity. I want direct mechanical freaking horsey torquey power. Give me my power. I want my watts. I don't want any losses here. I'm already having losses from having basically the equivalent of 4 turbines. You know what I mean? But it's technically not, considering. It's just like, how does it go in? Why doesn't it do... What is going on here? It's, of course. It's always the same whenever I think about them. Because it's like, look at this. Look at these stators. It sits inside the stators, which is technically speaking the housing. It rotates itself, and then eventually it goes and pushes through this hollow stator area into the, inner part of the housing, its version of stators outside, because those are the statically fixed. And it's like, well, I have to have like this middle part for it to do that anyways, so it's like, screw this. And equaling tube headers are super easy to do because then I can cast them in a manifold that just goes up, goes down, goes up, goes down. You know what I mean? Like, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, however many spots. Let's say it was 6. So it's like 6. Okay, divide it by, like, it's this far from the top and bottom. I just have to have it rotate over here. I have that rotate, and then like it just zigzags to this point where it enters, and then I can do the basic bitch like vacuum tension spring. So it's like, oh, this is a low pressure gas that it has a plunger on it, and then it's like, once it exhausts, it then sticks back into it, and then it has what is the equivalent of a lower pressure environment behind it, which is great. You want that. that makes it more efficient for having the air to come out, the exhaust that is. So anyways, it comes in, it then goes back down, so it goes down, and then it goes and exhausts out. Simple stuff, right? And it's like, well, that's a good thing, generally speaking. Typically. For me, at least. It's like, this is simple. This is cast it and then stick, like a cylinder with some stators, and then I'm done. And I'm out. Here's the stupid little axle I stick to the side. It's all I need. Here's a little vacuum pump. It's done. And then it's like, same thing with this. This is basically 2 turbines, but they're going to be big boys. You'd want them to be bigger because, of course, it wasted energy doing that, right? And it's like, it didn't waste energy. I turned it into compression. You know what I mean? It's all. So it's like, that's work energy made to do more work. It's at first just a straight up turbo that is not a turbo, it's a supercharger, right? Basic stuff. Like, you have an understanding of how a turbocharger works, because it's like, look, this is a gearing ratio. It's like, this is a gear, it goes to this gear, this gives me this result. Here's, actually, instead now, I'm going to use a venerator, because fuck it, venerators make sense. What's a venerator? It's effectively just a transmission from a larger to a smaller, or a smaller to a larger gear, depending on how it works. Well, you can start at a larger gear, and then it'll immediately go and drop down to a smaller gear, and then slowly brings itself back up to a larger gear. Makes it more efficient as a supercharger. But then eventually, it's going to switch over to the turbo. The exhaust does the work for the compressor, which is now just a compressor. It's a compressor, that's all it is. That's all you need to think of it like, and as. That's it. But it's like, the moment you have that for those other ones, well, that makes total sense. It's just a T-junction down, and then that goes off into what is essentially another axle that goes off into the outside ring of the compressor. It goes in, it fires it out, then that goes from those blades, which is just going to be a counter rotation, because that's fine, who cares? Center out to even further compressed, kind of like closer in, with the stators. So it goes from this, take a ring, and then there's a spinning blade system that goes into 2 stators that are in the center. As they rotate, they'll basically grab, turn in, and then get sucked into what is effectively valves. They can't go that way. Instead, they just fire faster in at a smaller diameter, and because of the smaller diameter is now the ring, it means it's compressed. Guess what stators can do? Be a cooler. Yeah. Same thing with a bunch of little radiator stator vanes, which are literally just teardrops, wings. That's it. They're just little teardrop wings, teardrop-shaped wings. You want them to be as little as possible there, which means they're thin, but it means they also happen to still transfer out heat. And then you still have the stator area in the inside of that housing in between the 2 counter-rotating parts, which are now also kind of like props, as long as you properly place in the right holes and the right bends for the hourglass shape kind of design. Because it doesn't really necessarily matter so long as it's thick enough to allow for the inside torque converter style cooling, and also, increased torque length, I guess, torque converter sort of thing. Yeah, leverage length, not torque length. But anyways, that thing, and then that's just a teardrop shape in the rear. It goes off to the rear. It's another version of a teardrop from the tail off into the bulbous area, and it curves in, sucks it in. It goes off to the little stators, which is going to help cool it, and then it's going to, because that's where the main part of off where the radiator is, the liquid coolant. In this instance, I use hydraulic fluid because it's super simple. It can be a 1-to-1, almost like a coupler. You know what I mean? So it's like, once it spins up, and it's like, once it gets hot enough, that's all I need. There's like, that's my water to air, like a double water to air cooler. So I still have coolant over there and there, but then like, that's another version of cooling both the hydraulic fluid, because of course it's going to get warm, which is fine. Kind of, because I'm cooling it. I have a hydraulic fluid heat exchanger, which is good. Anyways, goes back in, it's inherently more balanced too. Yeah, which is like the whole real reason. Like it's super good. It's like 49cc. Guess what I can make out of that? Stupid power. Stupid power. Yeah, like honestly, yeah. It's like take like whatever length like of rod, because like that's really what that is. But it's like, oh, it's 49cc, so tiny little tiny compressions. Oh yes, no, 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 with two-stroke scavenge, or if I want to blow in air and fuel on both sides into like a compression, meaning a diesel style. Instead of diesel, though, it'd go into a chamber and then rocket exhaust, and then it would just stop after a certain point. And it's like, and now I expand, then I exhaust, and then I go again, and constantly, automatically. It's a rocket injector, effectively. And so now it's a true one stroke without any need for any intake from the bottom, except for that intake being there to have enough pressure and fuel to make the rocket injector, as it's the pump for the rocket that you're capturing. It's like, oh, you think 49 cc's? I have a real one-stroke, perfectly balanced damn toroidal engine. It's another Lemke engine design. Yeah, that's right, I'm John Tyler Lemke. There you go. But that's what it is. And it's like people wanted that instead of the multifaceted Jules Thompson turbine thing that I have, and it's like, this is simple. What are we looking for today? We're thinking 900 horsepower. Yeah, we can probably get there. Yeah, I'm swears, man. I'm swearing it. But it's like, it's basically triple the actual length of torque. It has far more compression, although I'm never going to go that high. It's always 15 is my max. I never go above 15 because it's like, I don't really like how expensive these fuels are. I can still get away with an 83 octane at 15 if I do it right, because that's fine as a rocket injector. That's actually just fine. Into it. And it's like, have fun with the new 49cc toroidal engine extraordinaire, heat captured into, that's an aerospike version. So like two of those then are tubes that are then like divided with the right necessary little vacuum effect, and then it goes off into, which is what an aerospike does. It like collapses it, and then it's like, that's just another little funnel into your catalytic converter. And then whatever you do for your version of a muffler silencer setup, good to go. You know what I mean? But for me, it's like, I could probably easily cut this down. Like, there's nothing saying I can't cast one mold and then cast another mold and then suck air out. Paint it with some powder coat. Heat that fucker up and get it to bake. Did a single wall vacuum insulation with a little bit of, heat insulating ceramic. I mean, that's cheap, man. I can do that, I can probably do that just fine. It's probably not that bad. And then it's like, well, actually, do I want that for my catalytic? The catalytic converter is going to be fine. No, it's not. That's fair. It might honestly melt, considering. It's like, I'm cooling like most of the spots, and it's only going to spend like a certain amount of time around like the actual turbine areas, which I'm cooling anyways with hydraulic fluid lubricant. So it's like, it's fine. That's fine. That's not the issue I'm having. The catalytic converter might honestly melt. Although I'm also like, so you're saying I should cool the catalytic converter and then make a waste heat generator? Remember this thing I was talking about for the piezoelectrics, the thermal photovoltaic, and then the thermoelectric generating material? Well, since I have to two-piece it anyways, and there's going to be vibrations, there's going to be, things I can make work like that. It's like, well, then I can just make electricity. And I have this. whole idea already with the repulsive, and you put some magnets there for balancing. It's balancing quotation marks for my electric motor. Cool electric motor, right? But it's like that can go in the manifold and on the outside and on the inside. You know what I mean? So it's like, oh, and then here's a waste heat generator radiator. I love this radiator design because it's like effectively I just have to make hot go in, and it does the work. Like it's a piezoelectric. That's basically it. It As it expands, it then contracts and it creates vibrations. It creates heats and pressures, which is thermally contract and expand. Piezoelectric loves that. You don't have to get tricky with the acoustics, but do a little bit of that, and probably go a long way with some of the radiator heatsink fins, and that should work really, really well at being able to create electricity. Then it's just a rectifier, battery, controller, capacitor setup thing, and then stick it to the electric motor. And it's like, well, I gotta cool the, you know, this thing. I think it's called a catalytic converter, and then I have to cool the exhaust. When you really think about it, you know, and these donuts, I probably need to cool that too. So it's like, I probably make, I just have to stick them in like a linear sort of fashion, plate where it's there, and then I could stick this part over that, and then with some bolts and make sure it's balanced enough, because I don't really want to go to a million RPM. I don't need a million. You know what I really need probably? I probably only need like 50K, maybe 100,000, you know what I mean? Like, that's all that's really necessary. With my rocket injector, exhaust things. It's like, oh, you think you can get 900? I'm pretty sure I'd get more than that, but okay. Like, for what it's worth, just without like the electricity even, I'm pretty sure I can get more than that. It just depends on the RPM that we're talking about. But then it turns into like, how expensive is that? And it's like, well, actually they do manufacture these. They're fairly expensive, but the more there's demand, the price goes down, and the manufacturing becomes far easier too as you get better techniques for it, because it is just mill it, make sure the right gap is there, make sure you have the right plates, stuck together, and you make sure you have in the little grooves and slots you need there for your insulated copper. All right, and then you have contacts. And they just need to survive. You know what I mean? Like, that's it. Like, legitimately, that's it. Yeah. Yeah, no, because I would do a reverse coil pack. So it's like a coil pack over like a round. So it's like that way it collapses as it goes around from like a little capacitor area, and then it'll go into that field into a higher voltage, and I can dump that with all the other volts that I'm creating, of course, as a result, and then put that through a capacitor battery and with a rectifier and the correct all the phasing for the three-phase axial radial flux motor that I would use. Like, you're right, it's going to be more expensive, but it's like, hey, do I need all that? It's like, if I want to become insanely efficient and make them weep with insane jealousy, absolutely I am going to do this. I'm going to make them weep. And it's like, here, you're going to pay me 10K for this 49cc engine, aren't you? It's a prototype, don't worry, though. It'll beat all your friends. Like, look at this. These are real power figures. That's a solid 500 horsepower all day, and I'm barely running it. I can easily make that much higher. You know what I mean? And that's the trick, the caveat, if you will, to like having people understand where I come from on that. Because it's like, well, why would you do that? And it's like, because efficiency. You know what I mean? Like that used to be maybe a 50-60% efficient for, work energy here to your axle. You know what I mean? Because it's like it's capturing the exhaust directly into work energy for rotation. It's not taking any of the heat loss though, which heat's a big part. So, you know, it's like here's some heat turned into electricity, which then gives me work energy. I do have about a 10 to 20% loss as I move it around, but so what, really? I mean, honestly, it's 90% efficient and 99% efficient at converting that energy into direct work energy. So it's like, I can easily get those 70s and 80% figures. Which means I don't have to run nearly as hard, nearly as hot. It's like, but I could. There's nothing saying I can't do that. I'm just putting it out there that maybe you'd want to try. You sure you don't want 1,000 horsepower from a 49cc engine? Like, how much torque are you looking for, huh? I could put a lot of torque in this fucker. It's like, that's the reason why I don't like these engines. Because it's like, these are works in progress at best that really realistically shouldn't even be seen. The engines that we started with, no offense to Look Auto, Toptechnologies, I'm glad that you put them out there, but it's still one of those things where it's like, these things are gonna fail so hard. They're not designed in the aspects that they need to be, so that way they'll actually be something that you feasibly would try and use. You know? They have too much of a failure rate. It's like, oh, I'm just gonna stick a little thing in the bottom for the air spring, right? And it's like, they're not gonna work. You know what I mean? Like, I have to constantly change those damn rings. And it's like, fine, whatever. So, but it's easy. I can just, make a bottom part that you and then I'll stick another ring on. It's like, right. Your efficiency as the linear generator goes down tremendously. It's not cooled very well. You know what I mean? Like, that's loss in every damn way. Like, you are honestly no more efficient than a regular engine. You're touting yourself as more efficient, but you're not. You know what I mean? Like, it's just not going to work. And the maintenance and repair costs add up. You're not a good generator design. I can easily make a better generator design than you by doing that. And it'd be cheap and easy to manufacture. The Storedale engine could be way better than yours. Make way more generator levels of electricity for your hybrids. And it can also run it straight right into your rear wheels or front wheels or all of them. It's going to be really small for what it's worth, but not as much as you might expect. You see, it's all very much dependent on the types of setups that you have. Either a single donut and one static, or a counter-rotating with my arms, my increased arms for my hydraulic fluid. Like, if you don't do that, it's like, well, you're gonna have to make it bigger. It's easy enough to make it bigger, though. You know what I mean? Like, for what it's worth, it's super balanced, and it's not hard to throw tubes together inside of a tube. Like, there's nothing saying I can't do this. It's like, hey, are you sure you don't want, like, maybe, what is this, a 5? We're got 5.2 liter? Let's do a 5.2 liter. Balance it right, counter rotate it, stick it together. The other part of the counter rotation is just gears. That'll stick it to the axle. Like one axle is turning, that's another axle and that'll stick it to it. That's all you need. You know what I mean? It's like, that's all. That's all that's necessary. But you have to remember, there's always caveats. Always. If you don't know about caveats, let me tell you the worst part about caveats. How do you get those tubes to the middle part axle? I didn't say I did. There's a bearing seal in the middle that allows fluid in the center, in between the two tubes. That's where the axles have to connect. Simple, easy, effective. That's why there are stators there in the center. That's also one of the reasons why it connects to one singular tube that's rotating, countered. You know what I mean? Well, wait. Why would you do counter? Because I don't need them to be anything other than allow for fluid to flow there. If they curve it the right way, guess what happens? It allows for fluid to go up through the tubes and allows some of it to get diverted off to the rear, which then captures the rest of it as a pump. It's simple, easy, effective. You don't want counter rotating? Okay, you don't want counter rotating. Just make a single one. Single one works just fine. It's easy. Because they'll connect at the rear. You know what I mean? Like this one's kind of rough for me. Remember the teardrop part I said I have? You know, the parabolic spike, the curve that goes from in and out like a torque converter. Well, yeah, simple, understandable. You know what I mean? Like you can totally understand how that works, right? But it's like, so what if I stuck a fucking goddamn gear and axle in there? What if I just fucking made it so that way I transfer these counter-rotational bullshitteries directly into like a fucking clutch and transfer gearbox sort of flywheel setup? You remember that? No, it's not possible. And it's like, no, that's definitely a thing, yeah. It's like, but why? It's only got the one. You know what I mean? It's like it's only got the one, right? It's like, right? No. You're almost there. You're almost there. You're almost home. The center tube and tube. Remember, there is an axle there. Remember? I said that there's a hub. There's an axle. It's not just empty. You remember I said that? I remember saying this. So I guess you didn't catch up on that fast enough because you weren't paying attention. So here, I'll explain it. There's a fucking axle hub there. Guess what? There's a way with these things called gears to connect that like a fucking differential. And you know, it has to be connected from the outside to, and you know, and so you know what that means? It means there are stators there that are static, kind of ish. Not really, if you're being honest. Come on. Because there's a bearing. Remember, there's a. It has to rotate and allow air to go in, and it acts like a pump because air, you know, that's airflow. You don't want the air to go in. It's going to go through off to the you know, that whole, and then and that way it doesn't want to go backward. It goes out and over and so on, and then that's another lower pressure, and then, you know what I mean? Do you get it yet? It's like, it's such an easy little thing to understand for me, but it's like, I'll describe it really fast. So it's like, there's an axle there, there's a hub, right? And they need to be covered so that way they can have lubrication and hydraulic fluid that's lubricating it go through. That's cold. So it's like, there's an axle there that's attached to that, right? But it's like, remember, that needs to go and get connected to the outer tube, which is rotating. So it's like, there's a front part, right? And it's like, no, I don't need a front part. Why would I need a front part? I don't need that. There's a tube there. Remember, I want the air to come in. Remember? So it's like, right. Well, yeah. So it's like, there's going to be a gear. There's no front part. There's no seal. I don't need that to be sealed. Why would I need to be sealed? So it's like, there's going to be gears there. There's going to be gears there in the rear. It's fine. But it's like, I don't need them to have a lot of gears. Why would I need them to have a lot of gears? It's direct one-to-one. You know what I mean? It's like, I only need enough. I only need the one, really, if we're being honest. Just enough to separate it. It's already going to be sealed to a bearing. So it's like the gear just needs to transfer its given amount of you know, torque to the inner tube. And then, of course, I have that in the center where the hub is. I need that axle to then put that amount of torque into that axle, which is fine. It's going to do that. Then it goes off into the rear, where the parabolic spike is, which is going to be connected to it, which is fine, because I said that that's what it's going to do. Which, there's a seal here. Oh, so much. Oh, the seals that are cold with cold air moving cold. No carbon, no fuel going in. Because there's injectors in the fucking donut. What the hell is this? Who are these people talking? You said our seals will fail. Oh, you're the Aquarius engine designers? Is that who you are? Are you a fucking idiot? It's like what the seals would fail, right? Not really, if I'm being honest. Like, it'd be pretty hard. Like, eventually you'll have to replace anything. But if you ever look at any crankshaft ever made, you know that their seals eventually fail and you have to replace them. These ones would be pretty simple to make. For me, the main problem is actually the axles. The axles have to be fairly thick for the hub. And so it's like I need to be able to make sure that they're not going to ding, 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 ding. And so like I have bearing axles effectively. With like one singular gear is fine. That's all that's necessary. With a bearing in between it. So it's like two differential, like trapezoidal, whatever they call them, gears, but then there's a bearing in the center. And it's like, but it's not really, is it? No, it's, you know what I mean? It's like, why would you say that? Because it wouldn't transfer anything, right? It's like, not really that way. No, but then you see, I have the two at the top and then the sides. You know what I mean? Where the seal is. So it's like, do I need that? But it's like, fine, whatever, screw it, I'll do it. You know what I mean? Here's another fucking one singular gear at the top and bottom. Alright, so it's 4 technically gears, but it's like really with a one bearing basically. So it rotates around. It'll be fine. It'll survive just fine for like a really long time at that point. You know what I mean? It's a planetary differential, but it's a lot of waste if you ask me. You know what I mean? Because it's like, this is easy enough to... My design basically removed that, if I'm being dreadfully really honest. I used a friction component. That's it. I did. Like, I was like, you know what? This is just going to be a fucking, like, clutch. This is it. This is going to be a clutch. Like, I'm going to have this clutch. It's going to open up from the rear, and then it's just going to have bearing gears on that. So it's like, as it opens up, it'll engage that, as that will be able to spin faster, because I kind of want that. And then it'll engage everything, and then it'll engage that. After it's spun up, it then engages, so that way it has a minimum RPM that it needs to run at for it to run, which you'd want that anyways, because it could technically run at like 1 RPM with a fucking rocket injector, but it's like, I know, no, I'm not looking for that. You know what I mean? Like, I can use this fucker to like spin up to the point where it'll actually have the necessary pressure. You know what I mean? And then I can use spark ignition to start it going, and then as it goes, and then it will friction and transfer its energy from the top tube to the bottom tube, because that's another version of a gear. So it's like, once that's spinning, that's going to start spinning that, and then that will engage, and then it'll still allow for it to counter rotate. But because it's counter rotating, because of the way a clutch works, that allows for it to then engage that and then rotate it opposingly just fine. Okay, that one's hard for people to understand, apparently. Alright, so if you place gears on the inside diameter of a clutch, where the tube housing is, as it spins, it'll counter-rotate that, okay? Which then will engage the clutch heading the same direction as the outer tube will be heading. Same thing for inside the little hub. As it rotates, when you have a bearing there instead, it's like, oh, and then they'll counter rotatively turn, equal opposite, and then it will engage the clutch with the bearing gear effectively that allows for that to be there, and then it engages at the axle. So it's like the top, the bottom, and the center is connected. Once it has reached rocket, meaning rocket exhaust, rocket injector levels of spin, and before that, it's basically just adding fuel like a standard psh, psh, with the little bump stops. But once it gets pressurized enough and it's run for a while, then that gets transferred into enough fuel and air pressure that then go into a chamber that will then rocket exhaust into the combustion cylinder chamber. It's really more of a toroidal shape, so it's like, what do you want from me on that one? But anyways, as it spins, it'll also allow for exhaust to come out just fine, because that one's over at the top. You know what I mean? Because that's all that's necessary. Because it's, yeah, the geometric. No. Yeah. No, I'm not talking to anyone technically except for in time and space stuff. A better way to put it is, it's like, so given the fact that the rotation of the two donuts allows for a opening like a port once it has moved from each other, but you have to shape the donuts to do that properly, but then that's just like allowing for a degree of resistance with like springs, like a resistant vacuum. So it's like there's a plunge there, but there's not a plunger, it's really just gaps. And so like there's a given pressure here, there's a given lack of pressure here, and as it spins, it has a degree of resistance to continuing along, as it will then have to resist against this vacuum and to be able to do it. And so it allows for it to open up at different RPM. All right, and then it's like that gets maintained by simply allowing for a degree of exhaust sucking out more, or increasing the amount of pressure inside of that vacuum spring. So as it rotates faster, it then means that it can maintain where its exhaust ports roughly more or less are, inside of the from top to bottom bifurcated section on the outside. It allows for it to extend its overhang, so it has to go up, so it goes over and then up, and then of course there's going to be, for the other donut, like capture effectively, like scoops, so it's like a Pelton, so it's like effectively pushing against that to be able to get out, and then once it opens up, there's an exhaust port, you know what I mean? And so you only need it to be in these given areas, and it'll exhaust everything from that into the exhaust port, which then gives it the equaling to header area. It's sealed anyways, because of course you're going to need seals there, bearings, something to prevent it from bumping up against it. So like those are your contact, like a brush motor, but except of course you need them to be cooled and lubricated, and so like that's a simple, it's carved on the outside there to have like a little version of a multiple T-junction sort of area, and so like that way fluid goes in on the outside, acts as the bearing, and then there's a multitude of gap, and then it has to go up and over and down effectively as it rotates through it, and so that makes it really hard, like a piston ring, for it to go through until you want it to open up, which is pretty easy to carve in, because it's just like, oh, look at this. It's a carved in part to a straight line carved into a round part. So it's just like, here, let's put it this way, they're perpendicular and there's a gap. It has to go over, and then it has to go back down, and it has to go over, and it has to go back and then back up. And so that way, it's a piston ring. I call it like a T-junction because it makes sense, because if you look on it, it looks like a T. It goes sideways. Or an H or something, but you get the picture. Anyways, then there's, the oil groove areas, like several little, and that has to go through quite a few, and then a big old, this then has a sticking up part, the donut inside of the housing has to stick up, and then that way, if it curves inwards just a little bit, it then has to then pass around that and then inwards. You bitch! I'm being spun so fast, I don't want to do that. Put a little channel there on the inside of that, on the housing, on the outside. And then what do you know? You stick a little other part there on the curve in part, like a little T, like a half L basically. And it's like, then it basically really prevents any of that hydraulic fluid from getting in, and it makes a very strong lubrication effect. Now it's a bearing. It's a ginormous bearing donut part, which I still need to have bearings on the inside of the housing, but those are grooves inside of the donut. So it's like, works just fine. That's not the issue. That's never been my issue. My issue is like, how do I make a bearing into a electric motor generator? I can make that into a generator. There's nothing saying I can't do that. Let me look at this. It's spinning. I might as well make it make power for me. It's cooled. This is now a generator. It's like, I already got piezoelectrics, thermoelectric, thermophotovoltaics, electric generator. The donut's an electric motor, the housing's an electric, everything's electric motor shit. I have like this super uber duper damn fucking holy hell. Okay, go on. It's great. It's great. I get it. But it's like, whatever. Not my jam. It's like, it was just on the way to making super efficient, lightweight, very easy to maintain, very easy to take apart, very easy to manufacture and make engines. Every bit of this is easy. Like, it's just like grunk grunk, you know what I mean? Like bolts, effectively. And it's like even a tube within a tube. It's like, this is just slide the tube inside of the tube, bolt it. It's literally that simple. It's like, and then cut on the inside diameter, like the little slots. Put some seal, like little rings there, because it's like, it's not going to slide. I just don't want the pressure to allow for anything to get through, which is just like cutting the right grooves, and then put like a little ring there, like an O-ring seal, material, stick it in. Now here's some lubrication, junk, 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 dunk, dunk, dunk with the hammer, bolt it in, and you're done. Simple, easy shit. I mean it. It's for me, it's like super normal, easy stuff. But like, it's like, that makes sense, because it's like, I want it to be manufactured. I want it to be manufactured fast. I want it to be easily maintained. I want it to be easily able to be replaced. I want it to be, everything is super simple to replace. Like, even the seal in that, like, technically there isn't a seal anymore. If you look at the axle at the bottom half of the intake manifold, it's like, you stick that, it sticks over that. Like, it's a part of a bearing, basically. Which is, it seals it, yeah. But it's like, it technically goes over, like, that bottom half goes over that, so that way it's not really needing to be sealed. It has a tolerance gap that allows for it to overhang, kind of like a sliding, like, lobster tail, so it overhangs that. So that way it's never really technically going to ever really actually have anything that you need to do with it. Which, again, it's just like, here's a little overhang, like a couple of like as it slides over, then it's like, here's the little piston ring, like, you open it up thing. So it's like, just like open up the little circle, and then like you stick it in, and it's like, now I got this little overhang that fits into this little groove there. I put some lube there, just like dunk dunk, a little oil can, and that should work. It basically effectively stops the vast majority of air going through. Now, again, I do have a seal on the inside where the axle goes through, because like I want it to be balanced and have something to hold it there. So it's like that's just basically that. It's a bunch of little bearings that's a bearing seal that there's you can buy sealed bearings anywhere basically. So it's like it just needs to be able to handle the speed it's going to go at. So it's like that's really all that is. It's just stick that in there, and then I have like little threads. I do. Like I have little threads and put some thread locker on that, and then here's another little ring that goes around that, and then like that sticks it because like they have these little pokey out parts, and then they stick into that little part, and then it's like, well, it doesn't want to come out now. Just like any wheel bearing for your cars. And it's like this then is hollow, so it's like that goes into an axle. Stick the axle in. Here's your flywheel, here's your clutch, here's your transmission. Simple, easy stuff for me. Makes total sense to me. Apparently doesn't make sense to other people. I don't know why. This is really simple stuff. It's like the simplest gear stuff I can make. It's like, this is a clutch. Like, literally, I don't want that engine to produce any kind of actual anything to my freaking anything until it's ready as a rocket exhaust. Like, so I burned some fuel, whatever. You know what I did? I spun up my turbines. I spun up my compressor. I spun up the tube and then the tube outside. And they effectively make greater degrees of efficiency as a result. Like, that's fine. That's perfectly fine, actually. It's like, but there has to be a hole between the intake manifold and those hollow tubes, right? And it's like, thank you. Someone finally said those things that I wanted them to say. There are holes in between the holes, between the outer tube and the inner tube, remember? But they're counter-rotational. So how does that work? And it's like, yes, how do a slidey valve thing work? I'm gonna just really think about this for a second. No, you're okay. Like, I want you to, actually. You see what I mean? It's like, how does a sliding valve work? You know what I mean? Because it has to go from the hub axle here, that has to be hollow, and it has to allow for fluid to come in. And fluid to come in from that area where it's cooling air coming in, and then out. It has to go from that out in. And it has to go from there out in. And then from that final out, back, from in out. So it's like, it goes from that outer of the inner part of the, hub area, and then that goes out, and then it goes forward, and it goes out, and it goes forward, and then it goes out, which is because there are tubes there that allows for flow, and it's like, as it squeezes in between the two, because of course it can't be connected, it has to have seals there, right? Well, yeah. So it's like, okay, so it's going to rotate, right? And it's like, it's okay, so there's a hole there. Now it's a version of a little manifold waiting to just open up as it pressurizes. So it's still going to spin, but it's like, there's a gap there. And it's like, that's actually just fine. I want a gap there. Because if you don't know, it's like that gap never technically leaves any one of the piston rods. It just gets made to turn really hard, and then there's another one that's turning towards it, and it bifurcates off. It goes, and then eventually, this is all of it from this one as it rotates. And it's like, in that moment, though, it accelerated the air and it compressed it. And so it goes up, and then, and it rapidly increases its degree of speed and pressure for efficiencies. Like that efficiency is like, oh, I'm bouncing it up, I'm keeping it in, from the top into the intake to the manifold area. It's like like a heartbeat. Boom, 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 boom. See what I'm saying? It's like it's sucking it in, and then it blows it out, and it sucks it in, it blows it out. Gives it time also to cool off.
but it's like there has to be a little seal there. Remember? Like, well, yeah. It's like right. There is. It's like it has to go in between where the holes are. There has to be a seal there that allows for it to flow out and over and then up. But it's like the bottom part, like I don't really need it to be lubricated. You know what I mean? I need it to go up and then over into the tubes. Remember? So it's like that bottom's fine. Just constantly allowing for it to have like the nice little air go through. It's fine, you know. So it's like that can just be those little, curved in little teardrop shape as it hooks in and allows for it to go and then more easily transition during its spin. Which I need stators there because it's like this is going to spin quite a bit anyways. Which all stators mean are blades, support parts to the axle. So it's like, well, since I already have these here, dunk, might as well do this. This makes total sense to me. You know what I mean? It's like I should have that there, right? And it's like the rear, that's totally understandable, like why you have a static part, but it's not a static part really. It's going to rotate, right? So it's like that's fine if it rotates though, because it's like the inner versus the outer. The outer can rotate, but the inner can stay still. You know what I mean? Or vice versa if you want it that way. It's like it can slide next to each other and that'll still allow for it, but it's like you got to remember there needs to be holes there, and holes as they rotate get shorter and smaller and then wider. We don't want that, remember? So it's like if I allow for a solid part that's always static, then I can shape them in such a way that there's always holes from the center, then out, then back towards the center, and then out, or out towards center, and that allows for constant airflow, which is good. You're going to want that. It's a whole thing, you know what I mean? But it's like if you curve them, you don't technically need that inner part, right? And it's like I just like making it strong. That's basically what that is. I mean it. It's like, well, if it goes from this and then out and then it still allows for some flow, then I allow for those to be a lot smaller and thinner, kind of like a capillary tube. And so it's like that can then be spread out in such a way where like that center then goes off to the top part, the top tube, but it's really just sealed. You know what I mean? It's like that allows for it to bifurcate and seal between the two. So that way it can stay centered and then those can rotate with the two inner tubes. And a good way to put it is like that is now the seal that I was talking about. And like that way it has a static fixed position, so it's very strong there, and then the rotation can then allow for more than enough airflow to go through, which is good. That's another water to air exchanger effectively. You know what I mean? But then it's like I need the stators above that, and so like that makes total sense now because like that's coolant, right? And like that has to pass back in, and it's like that's fine. That's just like the stator's one side, it goes up and then it goes back over and then it goes and returns. You know what I mean? Because there's an inner diameter to the engine block that you have to put this over. You know what I mean? It's just like it's the stick there, right? And it's like that's just a rotating seal at the top for the arms, right? Which is fine. But it's like that bottom part now, that's our return. Simple. For engine coolant, which is going to need it more there than it is somewhere else because it has to go from that and then move through these little moments when there's a gap. Like there are going to be these little moments as they rotate, they'll pull it and then suck it off to the sides and then return it back to cooling it. That's a pump now. You know what I mean? Anyways, that means like that part that's your clutch flywheel. So it's like that clutch can be small now, and then like that flywheel can be way bigger, which is now like kind of a reverse if I'm being really honest. Because to be really frank about this, it's like, do I need a flywheel? I have ginormous fucking like huge spinny parts. But it's like okay, sure, why not? Screw it. We'll stick like a little further part, and then like that'll be like the extender. It'll just have like another version of like another bearing for that from the outside. And then it's like here's the flywheel, and then here's the clutch, you know, because you need it for some reason. I need to freaking hold all of this single stroke rocket exhaust up in here. Are you sure though? Yeah, just dump the clutches. It'll be fine. It's a huge flywheel. It's fine. It's fine. It's okay. Look at it just make burnouts all dang day. It's fine. Your clutch is burned, isn't it? Yeah, a little. Yeah. That's what I figured. It's fine, though. Just need a new clutch. That's just a large amount of money that you have to pay for a new clutch. Oh, okay, whatever. We're going to move on, because it's like, that's the point of like the 49cc part. It's like, if you look at the internal diameter of like what a 49cc is, it's like, yeah, right, that's fine. Like, this is the only combustion zone. Like, that's it. It's just, that's it, right? But it's like, no, but no. How do you measure a cylinder, right? It's like bore and stroke, right? Right? So it's like a cylinder, a ring, in this instance, a donut, a toroidal. How do you measure a toroidal's internal volume, right? You need 49 cc's. But of course it can change, because of course things are getting closer and then expanding and closer and expanding. And they're constantly rotating against each other. So it's like, what is the real, actual volume? It's like, of course it changes. It's not statically fixed, ever, really. So it's like, that's kind of rough, isn't it? And it's like, right, yeah. Well, here's a 49cc that it gets maxed out to at all times. That's it. You know what I mean? It's like, it's only ever going to get to 49cc volume maxed out. Total, in any one particular area. Right? Yeah. I love them. It's like, how does this work? Isn't that multiple 49cc's? And it's like, no. No, because at any one point, it's only 49cc's being used. 49cc, 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 49cc. Put 12 of them at once. But it's only ever 49cc. Yeah, at any given point. Which is how you would measure if I had 12 strokes, 12 times the strokes as a single cylinder. Still 49ccs, but like 12 times the strokes. And then it's like, let's look at the opposed piston single cylinder that happens to have a center and outer firing combustion chamber. It's like, it's still 49ccs. Yeah, but okay, and you agreed with that. Same thing with the toroidal. So you agreed with that. Yeah, okay, but now they're two-stroke single. Oh wait, no, why would I do that? I have a rocket exhaust. Remember the rocket injectors I talked about? It's like, here's some rocket injectors. It's pretty simple. I just compress air and fuel and I put it in a chamber and blast it in. Kind of like the version of a steam injector back in the day, except now it's with rocket exhaust. So they're rocket injectors. But they're injectors. You can just screw them into any direct injection. Or port. I doubt you'd do port, though, because it would probably burn your port. So, there's that. But, there you go. Cool. Good to go. It's fine, right? Right? But it's like, alright. But now, I have 3 of those. Still 49cc, but everything's single stroke, and it's a given pressure that I differentiate, basically, outside and inside, allow for a little bit, because it's always, there's lower pressure here, but then it's like it's exhausting as it goes towards the top dead center, except depending on how I do that, I can leave a certain amount in, and it gets compressed, and that's an air spring, so it's like I actually need less amount of burn, meaning air and fuel, because it'll spring back out. And like then as it gets far enough away, and I get back power, making less fuel use for more power. It's great, right? Super cool stuff. But it's like there's heat now. Yeah, no, no. Here's a fuel pump. No, 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 not fuel pump. No, 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 no. It's just a standard coolant pump. No, no, don't do that. Please don't do that. Please don't make a fuel pump work for this. I got terrified. Could you imagine? Oh, look at the hot fuel cooling my engine. Anyways, it's not liquid fuel in the sense of like liquid hydrogen or liquid oxygen. That'd be really dangerous. No, no, no. I'm just gonna drill out some more coolant, areas and allow for them to still be strong because you want them to have like the correct like structure internally. So what that means is it's like you'll take a bunch of V's that are hourglasses, and then you'll put another V in between that. But this time instead of the V going from the wide to the small, meaning wide towards the cylinder to the small towards the outer part of the engine block, it's like you also then do the other side, which is now wide towards the engine block and then small towards the cylinder wall. And when you do that and you have a little X, you make sure that that's a nice little curvature in there and allows for a lot more cooling surface area. That's far more capable of being able to handle the heat loads and capacities that you're going to have. Still a single cylinder, you know what I mean? But it's like, right. But then you take into my a post piston 3 combustion chamber single cylinder, the 49cc, and I've updated it a little bit so that way you can use it with regular piston rods and stuff because for some reason you want that instead of like, well, here's a hydraulic fluid version. It's basically a bunch of turbine couplers essentially. I'm not even kidding. It's like, look, it's a bunch of turbines with like these cavitation effects that make it so that way it turns better and then like has this little boundary layer overhang, and then run throughs like verticals. So it tees, and once it gets up fast enough, it then like skips off of that, and then like it uses the vacuum cavitation underneath to try and pull what's behind it forward, and so it goes into the turbine that's in the center. So I use that instead now, and it's like, why would you use that? And it's like, well, because that's kind of what a coupler is. So it's like you need one part that's spinning and then that goes off to that and then that returns it, and I have to have another one at the top and bottom that returns it. And like that's an alternator now. That's an alternator at the top, and then that's my turbo, super turbo kind of area, that's for my serpentine belt area. So that's like that's the crankshaft. Then it's like this is now, depending on which side you want or both of them, for front and rear drive. You know what I mean? Like you can stick a lot for 4 of them. You know what I mean? But it's like, do you need that? And it's like, well, nah, technically, but then now I have the equivalent of an electric motor area. It's like the spinning part that captures electricity. And it's like, well, that can be then sent, and then any other electricity for cooling can be sent to the crankshaft area. You know what I mean? So it's like, that's immediate capture. And it's like, I can still put a linear generator around this fucker. And I need to cool it anyways. Then I can make it air cooled. Because screw it, right? That's totally possible. So it's like, alright, so it's air cooled. And it's like a single cylinder, right? It just flows a torque converter coupler to it. I just have to bleed it out. And it's like, well, yeah, no, that's simple enough. It's like, here's an exhaust rotating valve. Remember these 4 parts here that are rotating, and then in the rears, it's like, right, well, those are ring valves. They're just going to continuously rotate. Counter, sure, but it doesn't change that they're still rotating. Opens it up for the exhaust to come out. Here's my turbine. You know what I mean? And it's like, that's fine. It's a torque converter coupler. It makes it far, far faster at being able to just and just seal that. There you go. Just put that up to here, fill that. Glug, 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 glug. There's my pump. That's easy. I have a pump here. There's several of them. Which one do you want? And then it's just return it back. That's all I have to do. You know what I mean? I just have to return it back to the flow. But it's like, the caveat is the valves. I have valves. So it's like, as it spins, it can spin at different rates, and I don't want that. You know what I mean? But that's why the ring valves are now gears. That's why I changed them into gears that constantly rotate instead of like rotate a little bit and then go back. Rotate a little bit and then go back. It's like they just constantly rotate. So now they're gears. It's like, that way it's like, screw valves. But like, that's why I have the valves. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, before I had these valves in between, so that way as they're turning, like, and then moving the hydraulic fluid liquid, it's like, then I can dynamically allow and adjust for the amount. But it's like, now it's just like, screw it. I got rocket injectors. Brrr! I'll just use the valve spinning. But it's like, at all times, I can constantly be on power. You know what I mean? And a hydraulic fluid is still able to be cooled. It doesn't change that it's still cooling. You know what I mean? It's lubrication. You know? I just have to top it up every so often because, of course, it's going to burn some amount of oil, right? Which hydraulic fluid is often oil. So, you know, there's that. But then I was like, well, you know, there's something saying I can't separate that. So I did. You know what I mean? It's like, well, this is the oil for the bearing area of the inside of the turbine, torque converter coupler, or whatever that is. Because it's like, oh, I could have it go all the way over here. And it's like, it fires off. And that's all I needed to do. Because all I need is a plunger system. That's it. So it's like, it's sealed now. You know what I mean? A plunger system works just fine. Because it's like, I can now have it separated. With hydraulic fluid on one side, and then I have the right necessary plates, as they're kind of like, you know, pistons, and then it goes into a center area that is very much a part of the plunger system itself that allows for it to then be like, oh yeah, no, I'm going to move this amount, but I'm going to slide where that is. And you know what? Because there are grooves here on the piston rod that allows for it to now act as a pump as it goes up or in, or both, really, is what I do. And then that's also with the air. So it's like the air comes in and it goes off to be in the exhaust path flow. And so like that allows for any blow by and blowback. It's just not blowback, it's blow by, okay? So no. And you know that it's blow by. You should, you're an engine designer. Anyways, goes over and then that now has a pump to fire it into the exhaust. It's like, well, it's cooled with hydraulic fluid, and if I want to put oil there, there's nothing saying I can't put oil there. So it's like, I'm done. You know what I mean? Like, there you go. Now it's a fully sealed system. But it's like, well, you didn't explain that in your 49cc. It's like, no, it's gone through a few revisions. But now here's how to make it easier with, like, crankshafts, because I hate crankshafts. You know, just for anybody's reference, they're not things I like. They're inherently made to be unbalanced, it feels like. You know what I mean? They're super annoying. Anyways, outward and inward has to be changed. Right? And it's like, well, you know, a ring is easy enough, but it's like, I don't want to use a ring. So it's like, if I go backwards, this is going to rotate a gear forwards, right? Except I want it to be static. But it's like, right, except you don't have to have it be static. And it's like, no, but it's going to be static. Like, right? Yeah, no. I'm a real killer on this one. Trust me. Seriously, it's stupid. But it's like, okay, then it's going to rotate backwards, right? And the gear goes the same way. It's static, right? That's fine. Okay, wait. So, you know, there's these gears, right? As they rotate, they'll then engage the right teeth the right way, and then they'll just turn like a counter-rotating prop gear in between the shaft. The ring gear the same way. Simple and easy shit. Like, I'm not even kidding. I don't need any bicycle, blah, 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 blah. I don't need any of that. So what it ends up meaning is that, like, the rear, alright, or the outside for the pistons here now rotate gears. but like they're not really gears, okay? So you have to understand that part. So it's like those are out to in, back to out, hourglass shapes. So like here's a bearing, and because the gear is not going to be static the way it once was for you, because you'll probably change it like that. Because it's like, well, this is a way for me to get away from your design. It's like your design is going to be shit if you don't keep it static. Keep it static. Keep the gears static. As they go out, they'll go back in. All right, what does that mean? And it's like, well, there's another tube there. So it's like, as that tube goes out, it'll go in. As that tube goes in, it'll go out. Right? Because tube within tube makes sense. We know how to do that. Pretty simple, seems like. But you know, it's like, right, I know how to do a gear in and gear out, right? It's like, okay, but that's not what that is, okay? So automatically you're wrong, so shut up. So like immediately just, you failed. You failed the engineering class. But don't worry, I'll catch you up to speed. So a tube within a tube, all right? So it's like, why? Because it decreases the amount of length of extension that you need. So it's like a telescopic. So it's like this only now needs to extend this amount, and it will have extended farther as a result, all right? It's like, that's why it's like, this is not just a hollow tube, it's got this thing called holes in it that are definitely horizontal. And what does that mean? It means the gear then going inwards moves back that other gear that you moved backwards. Because it's like that gear is then going to rotate in a static position inwards. Because this one rotated outward. So it's like this rotates out. That then moves this. You get the picture, maybe. But it's like, here's a better way to phrase this for people to maybe understand. It's like, instead of using threads, instead of using double helicals, instead of doing all this fancy shit, which is annoying, by the way, to have to deal with. For most people. Like, for me, it's like, well, yeah, dung, 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 and it's done. This one is much simpler. Alright? There are teeth, okay, that, because this thing has to slot into the outer part of your housing. Well, yeah, because you're going to want a little bit of spring there. So it's going to be a hollow. It's going to be just like the things that are the Aquarius engines. It's like, it's going to be hollow, except it's like, that's not really technically anything other than what you think it is, which is a vacuum. As it goes inwards, it's a vacuum, and it goes back towards that, going outwards. That makes it easier. Alright, so why would you describe it like that first? Because like, I need to have you understand why this is doing what it's doing. Because it's like, remember the tube? Remember I talked about the tube? The tube is going to help the seal part. Because you stick that, and then this, and then this stays there. Anyways, goes back in. So as it goes back in, this has to have another gear, right? And it's like, well, no, I don't. I don't. Well, it's got a sliding part, remember? On the tube on the outside. So it's like, that now hollow part can be fed in on that side with gear teeth on the outer diameter of that hollow connection rod for the piston rod. And so what that means is, like, I can then allow for that to rotate, and that'll rotate that gear. Alright, that's going to rotate the standard gear ring, the internal gear ring, and then as it goes back, as the tube outside wise, goes the opposite direction, that then moves the other gear that's there, which then of course goes back into the inward direction for that gear, for the piston rod to go back. But it's now on both sides. And like, the reason why this is cone shaped, however, this is the real You're going to understand this for very good reasons. I want you to pay attention to this. Like, I understand that one I still don't really understand, but we're going to move on, I guess. Which is just gear teeth, and then it rotates, and then that goes to the other rotation, kind of like these differentials we have, and those gears then rotate like a shaft that then goes to another gear that's this gear that's rotating, that's sliding with the tube because it slides through the tube, except, like, it's kind of a bearing more than anything. Yeah. Since we have to stop and make sure they understand this. Anyways, that gear then turns the other gear, okay, outwards, and then the inward direction also then turns it. But okay, so this one's gonna shock you. All right. So there's these things called gears that when they turn, they have different gear teeth on them, and they engage at different points as they turn. So that way the internal part of the ring gear turns always the same direction. And that can be a very big gear. Big ring. Okay. But this instance, it's not. Okay, it's this standard size. Because we're going to make it much bigger over here on the outsides. Both sides here are much bigger. They're literally just straight up very big gears. Or, well, plates, but it's not really plates. So it's like they're balanced. They're in a static fixed position on the outsides of the engine housing. All right, the engine block housing stuff. All right, because there's tubes and so on in the center. Anyways, those are now statically fixed positions, which makes it much simpler to simply take the bearing off and replace it with like a dunk. It's clicked in. It's now bearing. Anyways, what that means is it goes from a larger, or a given size diameter, from where that is, and so like it goes for its given amount of rotation to a larger, like a torque converter at increased torque because of increase in gear size. It then goes to a smaller, and then it goes into a much larger gear. Like, I have a gear increase effectively twice. So it's like, this is now bigger. But it's like, that's where the bearing area is for the rods that then connect, which are hollow. There's a reason why they're hollow, though. It's because I want them to be very lightweight. Standard stuff, right? Anyways, so, like, those are another version of two gears next to each other in the center, which then have, like, that ability for those to rotate inwards and then outwards at a consistent timing interval. That then also allows for rings to be counter-rotating in the center and then also at the outside, while also having a center ring to allow for oil to go in where the piston skirt is. I still have a tapered, effectively, version of here's some oil on this side, here's the air hole area, it goes off, it gets fired off into exhaust, and then there's a much better gap with several piston rings and oil ring and so on to allow for it to blow by, and it's always sealed, much more so. And in fact, it going outward then allows for that oil to go put itself back into the flow of oil, as it's now basically a pump. And see, like that vacuum part, guess what that vacuum part does? Because I have a bigger ring over here and that vacuum here, and it's like I want that to do work. And so it's like, well, if I have a Stirling kind of effect, so there's like a vacuum here, and it's like then as it goes in, it gets a bigger vacuum, and it's like there's pressure over here, and it's like, well, guess what? That's air sucky blow. That's right, it's a supercharger. So it's like as it goes in, it then basically creates a smaller area, which then pushes it somewhere, has to push it somewhere, and then there is a rotating part for the crankshaft area. That sucks in air, and it, sucky blow, basically. sucks in, blows it out into the air intake, which really these rocket injectors I should describe in those instances they're just pumps, effectively really decently strong pumps that are rotating with the ring gears. All right, instead of like having my undulating cool acoustic pump styles of like with these vortexing to increase the amount of cooling, and then it gets from a larger area to a smaller area into these little gaps like air nozzles into a given chamber that then blows in constant air and fuel after a spark ignites and it has been compressed as it goes towards the center, and then goes constantly dynamically. You get the picture. Anyways, we're moving on. That's that version. This one's just a fucking pump. It just spins really fast. One side's fuel, the other side's not. It's air. Air goes from in to out, so it goes from inside diameter and then it curves in towards out, then it gets curved in back towards the center with fuel, where the nozzle, because of course it's a nozzle, has to go with a nozzle. Standard stuff. It's fuel rail, air manifold, air intake manifold, sucky bang blow. Because sucking air, sucking fuel, bang, blow. Anyways, works out for a single cylinder, in this instance, 3 combustion chamber, which there's cooling, which is a hydraulic fluid and or regular engine coolant. Because I have to cool the exhaust, valves as they're rotating, and I have to have them have lubrication. I use hydraulic fluid. That is a lubricating hydraulic fluid. Because that's really simple and easy to do, and it can still cool and lubricate the gears, which, because I can always add in a larger gear if I really want to, because then it goes into those counter-rotating, which then goes into a single axle area that allows for you in the front and the rear, respectively, to have a front and rear. So I have like a crankshaft, standard crankshaft stuff, for my supercharger, serpentine belt, whatever you want in the front, and the rear, which is now going to be your transmission area. Which then turns into, here's a bunch of exhaust into a big elongated turbine. Goes in from sides at the outsides, and in the center, which equal link tube header, standard vacuum valve stuff. Goes inwards, then blows outwards, then goes back towards a center, back towards standard one singular intake, standard sized turbine for like regular turbine, but then elongated shaft up at top. Then that goes to venerator supercharger thing at front. Then those given conversions of exhaust to rotation will then get dumped in, and then also into, of course, the thing called the crankshaft, because that's what it is now. And of course, they're timed, very evenly timed. There's not much for it to fuck up at that point. I have a standard, for me, I use a multiple CVT gearing. So it's like there are CVT packs that are my gears. So it's like 1 to this many ratios, and then that's a pack, and then I switch to another pack, and I switch to another pack. So I still have changing of gears, but it's like, that's easy, because it's off to the side, and then like I use rings. I've thought about the golf ball, but then it turned into I'm not using golf balls, although I do use some golf balls, because it's like you just move the golf ball, which is a ball, forward or rearwards, and that changes the gearing ratio. But then I was like, right, but there's also a gap in between. So if I make a gap in between where if it's stuck off to let's say it's a right angle, relative to the circle that is facing you, so it's perpendicular now to itself, then I have a way to stick that inside and then have that smaller diameter also have a ball there, which allows for then that to also do a flat part there, and I can make multiple different packs basically look like a standard cone style sort of, transmission shape and look, right? But it's like I can also do it kind of in a different multitude of ups for vertical or sideways and so on. Really pack it in there, and then get that to the rear wheel or front wheel respectively. And then I have like the same standard clutch and gear for, like, let's say a motorcycle or any car, because it's smaller. That's right, smaller. Smaller is better, lighter weight, and they can be hollow too, because hollow means they'll more likely be able to support the torsional, forces as they rotate faster better. Same thing with the balls. That's right, the balls can be hollow. They also handle heat a little better, yes. All of it's better if they're fucking empty on the inside. With vacuums. Woohoo! Anyways, simple stuff for me. Makes total sense, but it's like, look, there's no way you're getting that kind of torque. Look at this rotation to this rotation to this rotation to this rotation to this fucking big old rotation. Look at this. You said I didn't have much torque. Look at the torque I've got. Fuck you and you're not having torque bullshit. I have tons of torque. Look at my longer stroke length too. Look at my effectively doubled stroke length with the stupid tube within a tube thing. And then I made it even a longer stroke. And then I put 2 pistons in this so I have even double the stroke length. And then I have the stroke length inwards too, so I doubled that stroke length. And then I made a larger gear to a larger gear to an even larger gear. So I really gave you torque. Look at my 49cc going like, nah, bitch, I got torque. There's no way I don't have torque. Let me tell you about the torque I've got. And then I proceeded to smash records in my mind. Constant, because like this is all stuff I can just do. Like other people are like, I need supercomputers to model all. And it's like, nah, let's just think about it. Just imagine better. Can't you use your brain properly? Can't you just fucking figure it out one step to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next? This gearing ratio, this size gives you this amount of feel of, and then it's like this amount of resistance to this, and then like the vacuum and that, and because of movement of air, and then given degrees of increased efficiency and heats and frictions and so on, and then eventually, oh, what do you know? It's this amount of torque. It turns out it's about 310 foot-pounds of torque. At like, standard 700 fucking RPM. Granted, I'm also running at 15 psi with rocket injectors. So, brake mean effective pressure is effectively cooled because I have a bunch of turbines on it. Standard stuff. Just cool your turbines, man. Put it through a cooler, which then, makes electricity, and then generation stuff for the cylinders. For your thermal photovoltaic, thermoelectric, piezoelectrics. Solenoid, effectively, yeah. Piston skirt rod area. Tube within tube, vacuum pressure, so on and so forth. It's like, where are you getting your numbers from? And I'm like, it's not 310 for what it's worth. Like, I capped it at 250 foot-pounds, even though I was easily able to get beyond 500. It's just like, do you really want to do the fucking pressures that's going to require? And there's a lot of fuel that you're going to burn to make that happen. You know that, right? Like, are you sure? I can give you 250 foot-pound torque all damn day long. It's not that hard for me. Like, this is brake mean effective pressures that are currently seen right now, and not even the highest brake mean effective pressure engines for motorcycles. And it's like, he's Russia. I'm not Russia. I'm an American in Arizona, and I live there. There you go. You already know who I am. I've already said who I am. You can fucking see me, find me, like fucking, you know who I am. So stop with the rush. It's like I'm not rushing on you. It's like this is easy. This is simple math. These are basic fucking parameters of gear ratios and RPM and brake mean effective pressures. Like, it's all you need. So it's like, let's see here. Brake mean effective pressure at the medium high end of a sports bike that happens to have a given gear ratio size increase of the given stroke length with efficiencies that make it well worth your while on this one. Because it's like, well, yeah, no, I mean, I don't even need the electricity things. It's just reducing friction by using harder materials like a chromoly steel on the inside and then like basic ceramics. It's like this still slides the right way for the top and bottom part of the outers for the combustion zones. And then same thing for the exhaust. Exhaust is the same. The exhaust is a part of the tube. So it's like tubes have holes in it. Tubes then have this rotate through. They're gapped appropriately and in such a way that it means that it has to go up, over, down, and over again through multiple little sections of bumps that it has to go through after that point on the outside as it goes back up. And it's like, oh, really? It's so impossible to make sliding valves, huh? The pressure means it does the opposite of what you said it would do, which is it seals it! That's right, it seals it. They're on the outside of the cylinder, which I'm going to scream at you because it's like you sound idiotic. Do you know that? Like you, that person that's saying this can't work sounds idiotic to me. Like, for real. You really actually do. It's like, where are you getting these figures from? Do you know physics of levers? Do you know any of this? You should know some of this before you say bullshit. If it was so easy, everyone would be doing it. So I'm smarter than the everyone that you said everyone would be doing. Suck it up, bitch! That's as simple for me as it is. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some degree of complexity for this, which is the reason why I don't like it. It's like the hydraulic fluid works just fine, and I still get the 500 foot-pounds of torque, no problem. And yes, even at that 500 to 1,000 RPM, easy. It's just brake mean effective pressure, and then it's cooling it with some turbines, which then just dump it into the given, rotation of it all. With some rocket exhaust injectors. That's a simple idea and style. It makes total sense. And so it's like when someone says it can't be done, I'm like, that's because you're probably not thinking right. You didn't think about this correctly. Why didn't you think about it correctly? How come you're stupid sometimes? Don't worry about it, though. You don't have to answer. We're all stupid sometimes. Don't worry. I get you. We're all dummy dumbs. It's okay. That one's just a sliding ram, though. It's hydraulic ram. And so it's like, the linear actuator or generators that the Toyota and the free piston stuff was talking about? Same kind of idea. It's like, look, I have a seal here in the center. Those are my outers. Those are the outer so those are the seals. But it's like, they're not standard seals. Like, they're meant to allow for air to go through and to be pushed out. They're meant to allow for it to be lubricated as it does that, and it gets cooled too. It's meant to be more effective and efficient as a seal with fewer ultimately breaking parts that are not easy to fix because it's just multiple parts that you stick together and you layer the right way. And now because it's a forged all one piece construction, that makes it way simpler. It's literally like, look, this piston skirt and piston head, simple. I can just dunk, and it's done. I don't need wrist pins. Where are my wrist pins? I don't need that. Like, I don't, this bottom part of the skirt, what, I don't need that. I can make it hollow. I can make it easily hollow. Make it small, tiny, thin little thing, because it's always going to be in and out. I just need it to attach at that little, seal part, so that way it has like the necessary reduction of friction, which it's going to have now. But it's like, look, that's a hydraulic ram. Put the right seals on the bottom part and allow for it to come in as it pushes out. But it's like, right. But then it's like going to push back in, and it squeezes that it pushed in, that allowed for it to come into the vacuum area, which it's no longer a vacuum, it's sucked in. But it's like, it's also pushing that out. And so, like, that's why it's like a torque converter coupler. So it's going to go out, and then, like, that forces in there more hydraulic fluid. And then it's going to push it back in. So it's like, all right, well, that gives me more conversion of that given pressure, that pressure wave, back into being captured as rotation. And it just gets sent. It's getting constantly sent as a coupler for its given pressure into torque. Then same thing for the exhaust, right back in. Makes total sense. And it's balanced now. Far easier to balance that. Because it's like, well, I can make this really small on the outside, right? Because there's greater degrees of resistance because it's thicker. Water is more, or hydraulic fluid in this instance is denser. And it has to travel through given spins and ratios of resistance for the boundary layer, although I reduce boundary layer. Same thing with the blades. Like, the blades have cavitation, but then there's also the correct little divots and grooves on the blades now, and holes up there to act as waveguides and relief as it spins, and it captures more of its given torque, but also allows for a greater degree of change into the other area for the coupler part that spins in towards the center. And allows for it to come back in. So I have less resistance, which means I can run a bigger area. Instead of smaller, I can run it bigger. You know what bigger means? It means more mass, it means more movement, it means more braking and effective pressure can be run through. It means more efficiency for torque. So hydraulic fluid, flywheel, battery, crankshaft. So I have all of those rotating. That helps. They've got an electric motor on it. That's my starter motor. And it starts. It's 49cc though. I could never go from this small of a size to this large of a diameter, from that large of a diameter to this small of a size, and increase my gearing ratio as a torque converter style setup coupler. Oh wait, no, I could do that. I can absolutely do. I can do that. Why can't I do that? I can do that. Look at me with my extra double large gears. Oh, I have 4 of them in the center and 2 on the outside. Guess what? I just increased my gear ratio again. So I need them connected specifically for my exhaust. So it's like, that makes sense for what it's worth. So it's like, it's an easy little sell. It's just like, look at the length of my stroke. It's like, right? And it's like, this is wider to a smaller, right? And then that smaller to a wider, and vice versa. Because like, that's a ring for the 4, but it's like, that's going to be bifurcated from that ring into a 2. So it's like, that's a wider into a smaller. And it's like, then there's the intake from the top and the bottom, which then are from that small back to a wider. It allows for it to flow more evenly. Skip in. Same thing at the bottom. To the sides. And then top comes back in. Scoops it in. So it goes and gets pushed back in. More like off to the sides. So it's like, it'll go from the top down, and then it'll bifurcate. So that way it goes to spin it. You know what I mean? So it'll like spin it, and then it'll curve in. So that way it doesn't allow for that fluid to not more efficiently travel in. So it creates a cavitation sort of effect as it continues to race forward, but I don't want it to do that. And so like, that way it'll widen that given volume, meaning valve cross-sectional area, but then also allows for it to spin in, curve into that as well, and fill it more quickly. But it's like there has to be valves that are rotating because of the. Yes, do you know that the top part of the turbine here can absolutely 100% become valves? As they rotate, they'll close off and the intake cycle. Because I said there has to be these valves, right? And that's for my exhaust. And so, like, those are tied to the exhaust cycle. And so it knows when to close off each version of the turbines for flow of the hydraulic fluid. Simple stuff, really. There you go. But that's why it's like, well, that's an easy one. You know what I mean? Like, and then I was like, this is super easy to turn into my radial. You don't even know. I had all these gearing things for the radial, or I'm not sorry. I'm not saying it right. I'm sorry about that. The rotary, the post piston rotary. I was like, well, this is a bunch of bullshit for all of you. Meanwhile, me with my fucking hydraulic fluid pumps and some fucking valves that rotate. Brrr! Screw you and your idea of needing this crankshaft crap. I have pistons for this. What are you, fucking retarded? Oh my god. Not really though. I shouldn't use that for. But it's like you're held back by this idea that I can't just use a ginormous torque converter. It's like this is just fluid moving around. This is literally all that needs to be. Brrr! Fast, efficient, large amounts of transfer. Boundary layer gets reduced because of the speed at which it's going over and it skips over. And same thing with, because I don't need super uber hyper materials. Screw that. I'll just make like little like channels that have been put like a little T with a little overhang. I'll make a bunch of little holes at the bottom that try and head up, and then it's like eventually it'll flow fast enough that it'll skip over, and then it creates a cavity underneath that's like, hey, go over that way, and it makes a significantly reduced boundary layer effect. Just have to flare that little tip up just a smidge, like a little divot there at the tip of the overhang, and it jumps up. If you put a little bit of a curve to it, it'll jump up and it'll curve in, and then it'll fall back down as it bleeds off its curve, its rotation, back into a pumping effect of the center flow, and then it creates a faster flow in the center. The blades are pretty simple too. It's like, alright, so it enters here. I want them to basically do the opposite. I want scoops here that then go in towards the center, and then they go out on the other side. And then they'll just fucking skip into the flow and then dump its given energy into the curvy scoop part that then has like little wave areas on the sides with stators that run through the wave areas, which have holes that go from the tips of the wave areas and then into the stators that then scoop it towards the center, creating a given on the other side that creates its own given increased amount of capture of energy for its given rotation. This is simple stuff. Anyone can understand this. I don't know why you're so stupid and slow about it. Yeah, simple stuff. Anyway. But see, the thing is like, actually, though, that's genuinely, unfortunately enough for most people, the truth for me. It's like, this actually is how my brain works. It's just like, yeah, why wouldn't you do that? That makes total sense. What is this? just make them the right length, and like from wider to like a smaller back to a wider, but then like that smaller area then just has like the stator go through that, so that way it creates that given like little inertial like squeeze, because it's technically not smaller, it's the same size, but then it got smaller, so it accelerated, and then it introduces that given increase in that pulse that has to occur, then got captured by the other scoops as it tries to leave, and then it goes back in and creates a continuation of a vortex as it spins, as there's a boundary layer there that then has conservation of momentum. It then will spin and turn that off into the exit hole, which then will help it curve back in and then go and join in with the rest of the continuation of the spin of the blade, getting captured to all the scoops and the holes. So it makes total sense to me. Like, why don't you think about it? There's no more capillaries, they just have to be the right size, so it's not a capillary. I'm going to make a wingtip vortice do more work for me, but I'm going to capture it into the given torque energy that I want for conservation of momentum for the given radial force. Like, lever is wide over here at the tip. Give me more hit! Just, spread them properly in a nice corkscrew double helix of faction as it spins through. Of course, you're going to have like a series of blades and then a series of blades that are a little more straight versus the curved, and then that allows for it to then double helical that back together and get more force out of it and more capture for the given flow rate that you're going to want to have for this. And then the top part's going to be a curve from the out in, but it's actually outside and then in towards the outside part, which is another version of that from outside in. This one's inside out for like the initial pushing out for the hydraulic fluid. And so it's like inside to out, makes smaller to larger, that then gets bifurcated top and bottom towards the outside, back towards the or the outside back towards the inside, which is another version of like a Pelton, but instead of Pelton, you'd be doing a curvy, then it splits a little, but then it has to go up, of course, because nothing's perfect. And so like that up gets turned into the downward as it splits, and then that helps force more velocity capture for the given opposite reaction. So it goes in and then curves in as it splits, and then it creates a given continuation of go that way instead versus this way. And so it gives more torque as it heads towards the center, bleeding more and more. But of course, we're not wanting it to go fully towards the center, remember, so it has to go off towards the top and bottom, which is then also helping capture. And so like that's like double the length of the turbine now. And so I have 3 turbines from center to a wide part towards a center, that then gets to a wide part, so it reaccelerates, that then goes to another continuation, which is effectively a wider part. So it's like, because you have to imagine geometries. So it's like, think about it like this. So it's like from that wide, it technically got smaller, but then it split. And that split then kept its given amount of pressure, and velocity. Then went from that to an even wider part. And so it will continue to impart its given amount of energy. Just those are going to be bigger blades now to capture more efficiently with the stators and the holes and so on. And then those go off into return lines from the top and bottom versus the sides. So it's like, that makes total sense, That's where I'm at, because it's like, look at me, I made a super hyper efficient version of what is already out there, but now smaller and more compactified, because it goes from small to larger. All of the turbines do this that are super efficient. That's how that works. And of course, when I turn it, I'm doing it in such a way it's capturing that energy and then forcing that energy to impart more energy, from that wider part at the top and bottom, and then it gets captured. Anyways, it has to divert its flow, making it more efficient, of course, because it's like a coupler. So it's like, meanwhile, my O-rings, right, like, they're fucking lubricated, fuck yeah, and it's cooled the cylinder from the fucking goddamn hydraulic fluid, which has a cooler at the outside or a full-on, like, waste heat generator thing. Which I can also make the outside a waste heat generator alongside of the piezoelectric, thermoelectric, thermophotovoltaic sleeves that I could use with a small chrome ollie molybdenum steel, which is thin enough to allow for the heat, but then it's hard enough, especially if I can add in thermally resistant ceramics that are very hard to reduce friction and keep and maintain a proper heat balance inside and rare rate, which is great because now I no longer need the wrist pin problem, and then of course I still get lubrication on the inside, and then I still cool the cylinders because of course I've got the double V, which helps. And then if I make in that little X area where I make that hollow in the right areas, it's like, guess what? That's my oil. That's my oil from my lubrication of my piston rings on my piston skirt. Which is super good and necessary to have from what I hear. People like that stuff. Especially since I have a pump now, which is the fucking piston rod going through the seal. Which helps lubricate the piston rod sliding through the seals. And cools it. Because I also have hydraulic fluid cooling the oil, but also cooling that blow-by piston ring stuff. So it's like, that's gonna work just fine. But now it's a rotary, so it's like, that's just several gears that have gears in between that allow for it all to go into one singular axle, which is also a version of a capture from that center, or the outside back towards the center, and then back outwards towards the top, and the rest of them for the top and bottom, piston ram sizes, because that's all they are. They're hydraulic ram with a piston on the center, and then the outside that combust, that give it the work energy. And then it's like I reduced a large amount of all of the main issues that most people have with hydraulic fluid ram crankshafts, which is like boundary layer inefficiencies and capture as a torque converter coupler setup that is usually like 30% efficient. And I'm like, yeah, that's not good enough, so I'm going to make it 99%. That's not nearly good enough. So I'm going to do that instead. Especially if I cut the right holes on the tips there, that drives it in, and then that has its own degree of like rotation from like a Pelton and then in to outward approach. And that allows for me to have like another version of, hey, guess what? Hydraulic fluid go burr, because those are gears that hold them there with axle thing. Axle thing then drives towards the axle in the center with also those gears spinning and then in to out. And then rotation from out to in as it diverts outwards to inwards to where the hydraulic ram needs to be at the top and in the center. I'm sorry, towards the center where the axle, crank is. For my opposed piston, rotary. That's right, it's an opposed piston. And it's like, why would you use an opposed piston? And it's like, because it's got a lot of torque still. Effectively captures a lot of it, especially with like, look at this, these are rocket injectors. And this is my exhaust, and I can do out to in style, and then I have 12 on the center and then 24 on the outside. Because 24 on the outside, well, technically, let's say I was able to get like 0.8 of the outside, of that volume. Well, it's like, that's cool, but I have 2 of that, so now it's really actually technically 1.6, right? Well, yeah. And it's like, there's 24 of that. At once. It is perfectly balanced. Because, like, all things, right, must be perfectly balanced. Mean. Anyways, the reason for me that I would do it is like, oh yeah, no, it still works. I don't need like to machine like this hunk of whatever. I could just dunk and then on a lathe this the right way with a dumbbell setup, the right cylinder next to a cylinder. You know what I mean? And it's like this could go in pretty far. You have to remember that, right? And so it's like that has a decent amount, and I can cast this. You know, it's like boop, and then like hone it with the right sleeve, and it's like I've got all of that. Do I need a longer stroke? I have effectively doubled the stroke, right? And it's like no, but I actually technically did more than that, considering it's a torque converter coupler setup here, which is dangerous, you know, because it's like, well, I can make this pretty short, right? And it's like, yeah. Are you though? My short stroke. Is it short stroke though? I'm not seeing a short stroke here. That's well, that would. Oof. It's like yeah, and it's all that heat has to go somewhere, right? And so yeah, no, that's fine. That's a waste heat generator for you. I still have to cool the thermoelectric and all that. You know, so it's like that's not impossible to do. In fact, that's pretty easy because I have fucking hydraulic fluid which can be cooled. So it's like that's easy. Here's a radiator, the thermoelectric radiator. No, dumbass, no. the not thermal photovoltaic. It's a waste heat generator. It's a Jules Thompson acoustic fucking pump generator. That's all it is. It's piezoelectric diaphragm and fucking like heat sink fins with like a vacuum, and then it goes from small to large, and then it splits, and then it does the like little bouncy with the like necessary thin parts. It shakes and it rattles, it vibrates and it rolls, baby. I ain't no hound dog though. Sorry. Some reference materials for the older folks out there. Anyways, that goes from one side. That's this given size of inlet, and then it goes to a medium size, and then it goes to a larger size. That creates a possibility of a phase change, but in reality, it's a pressure difference, and then it goes from a small to a large. And what is that? That's a Joule-Thomson cycle. When it does that, then it allows for it to condense, and of course, that larger to a smaller is a condensing part. Of course, during that condensing, it creates degrees of heating and cooling, which is piezoelectric speak for mechanical stress and strain. That creates electricity. When I have the heat sink fins properly doubled with a vacuum on the inside, it creates a pressure difference. When I make the necessary holes around it, guess what happens? I get a pressure difference like a Stirling engine. As it's hot here and it's cold here and a diaphragm moves, I get electricity. Now, because I have electricity, with my electricity, I'm going to do you one better. If I do a thermoacoustic version of the same thing, which means heat and cold, it squeezes, and as air moves through, it creates a resonant frequency, which then draws out heat from the inside to the outside and then cools it, making it more efficient at doing it, which then creates, you guessed it, greater degrees of heating and cooling, which amplifies the mechanical stress and strain felt to the piezoelectrics while allowing for greater amounts of electricity produced. So I have electricity for your electricity because I knew you like electricity because, bro, I've also put some electricity in that electricity. Because, yo, dog, I heard you like electricity. Then I was like, here's some fucking magnets and a coil inside of these fucking, like, rotating bits. And so I was like, why not? Screw it. Because it's like these have to rotate and they have to have an axle. And so, like, here's a fucking coil basically on the inside the right way. Because it has to be certain degrees of thickness, blah, 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 wah, wah, blah, blah, blah. It's probably what you're hearing. What I heard is a bunch of electric generators that are the turbines, which are already going to be imparting their mechanical force through the given mechanical force here of the movement of hydraulic fluid. Because it's like, well, before it wasn't doing anything, it was just moving it to the outside, right? And then the final one, that's the majority of a torque. No, remember that single cylinder I talked about? I never talked about this, but there are rotating ring valves that are gears. Remember the gears? That way, the captured energy, yeah, you get that energy throughout all of the rotating turbines. That way you don't have loss to the fluid flow, turning fluid flow into work energy. So it's evened out. Well, in this one, same thing. I already have rotating ring valves because I need those there. But now I have fluid flow, but now I also have turn, and then blah, 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 blah. Long short of it is, I have gears, I have electric motors, I have, guess what, generators. Now I also happen to have more captured energy to direct fucking real world levels of energy here. That is called work energy in engineering lingo speak. Wheels go burr, spin, bus round, round. Do you understand now? That's right. I have more, but I don't really use that for what it's worth. I just said that because you probably want to do that, but I don't do that because a gear and an axle, similar stuff. If I turn it opposite and then combine it correctly at the axle with some vacuum axles. That's right. I said vacuum axles. It's like, what's a vacuum axle? It's like, well, that's basically the same thing as anything else. What's anything? So a given vacuum in between two diaphragms, you move one side, it then moves over. As long as there's a reduction of friction and there isn't going to be any blow-by, right? And so, like, you can pull with inside that tube with a vacuum very quickly another diaphragm on the other side of that tube. Well, it turns out you can do the same thing with rotation. It reduces the amount of frictional components and, even better, the amount of weight that is there. Because I already have rotating ring valves, this makes total sense to me. It's just on the outside, and then a diaphragm simply needs to rotate. Now, how do you make a diaphragm rotate? You don't really, right? But how do chains rotate when they're all a bunch of singular links, right? Yeah, I mean, well, imagine there was a vacuum in between every place it was connected. Well, it would now rotate, right? Yeah, pretty efficiently, by the way. It'd weigh less than your standard chain. It'd get less hot, and you could seal it much more easily. Well, if you want to rotate it, like you can use a ring, like that guy was probably suggesting. I'm not going to do that. I use a direct approach. This given turn then has a given turn over here. It's a chain, basically. But it's like this has this rotating. So it's like this is a gear here, this is a gear here, there's a link here. You put the tube around it, it rotates. Rotates up here, it rotates down there. You just need the right pressure and the right vacuum. And what do you know? It rotates just fine, like any other chain and gear system. I don't need a chain though now. I don't need a whole bunch of little diaphragms. I just need the tube to have a vacuum in between the rotating gears. It's like, how does that work? That wouldn't work. I don't know how things do things. How do? How does in... That's stupid. Okay, well, mine does. And you dumb. And so, bye. You didn't explain. Well, when met with this energy, I don't feel like being nice to you.
All right. I put tube of vacuum, one side, other side, like chain. Okay. I rotate sunflower gear. That's like a gear. That's like a gear teeth, right? Okay. Yeah. Okay. 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 Wait. Now there's diaphragm here, diaphragm there. As it goes in, it pushes in. It goes in one side, it goes out other side. So top bottom, in, out, rotate, then goes and rotates back in, and it goes back in, it goes back in, and so like they then rotate that way and that way and that way and that way, and it now moves as a gear with diaphragms on the inside of its tube that rotates equally, very quickly, with very little actual loss. So much so that I ended up developing, yeah, you guessed it, a way to try and do this without hydraulic fluid really quickly. You have no idea how fast I was on that. I was like, there's gotta be a way to do this. And so I do. I'm not even kidding. It was like, well, I need to cool this. So like, there's now hydraulic fluid around all of the like diaphragm O-ring parts that are cooling the shit out of this. But it's like that's effectively all it is. It's like this then rotates inward and outward, and that then transfers inward, and then that's from the center, and then it's also on the outside, and those go in and then out, and then that then moves the axle like this. As it rotates, it then has necessary suction-y tube vacuum seal parts that then rotate it constantly one way. Only problem is now all those tubes on the outside need to fucking be cooled because it does get pretty warm. And like, it's not like the cylinder didn't get fucking hot. So it's like, there's still coolant that I have to push there. So it's like, it'll go from the top and the rear, and then it'll go over back to the bottom and the center, and then it'll go over and the bottom and the rear, and then it'll go up, around, and over, and then I'll capture at the bottom, and I'll capture at the bottom and the front, and that's my coolant, and then waste heat generator. And then it was like, this is now rotating ring gear thing, and that works because it's got hydraulic fluid that's bearing, fluid and seals. So that'll work. That'll work just fine. That's good, right? And it's like, yeah. So it's basically a vacuum rotary. Yeah, really pretty good one too. Like the efficiency loss between like the hydraulic fluid that I used to have is gone. Like I don't need to do any of these stupid fucking tricky crappy fluid things. It's just vacuum. Vacuum equal rotate. It pumps down appropriately, like I have a bunch of gears effectively. It's just the right tubes around it. And it's all cast. Like that's the best part. Like I can just cast everything about this and it does all the work. It's not a floating axle. It's still connected to the housing. It's like there needs to be an engine block that's around, and you have to connect that with the right necessary all that stuff. But like it still works just fine. The only problem is like most people would be like, "This is the what the fuck did I just? There's a vacuum. There are vacuums that transfer energy," and I'm like, "Yes, quantum vacuum pressure already exists, but like this is same." Except I have a pressure that I have to put on the outside. So it's like that's my spring effectively, right? It's like you have to remember it's like the pressure is the inside that is the cylinder, right? But it's like no, if I want to make more power, then I'll put like a pressure around that the right way, and that way it'll actually force in at the right times versus a vacuum. So it's like a vacuum only forces in pressure from somewhere else. But it's like if I add in pressure somewhere else, the cylinder pressures can be way lower, and it acts like I have a much, much larger engine for the size I have, because like that's my version of a flywheel, and I can cool that constantly. And so it's like, let's see what 5,000 psi gives me. Yeah. They were not happy about it, the people I were working with at the time, for what it was worth.
in my head, and I imagine I was working with people. They were not super happy about a 5,000 psi bomb that I had created. So they were like, tone it down to like 1,000, please. I was like, all right, I can do 1,000. That's fine. I'll just freaking cool this stupid damn bastard. And what do you know? My 49cc rotary opposed piston with a rocket and all that. 12 of them. 12 cylinders. But they all have to add up to 49cc instead of like one single cylinder. So that's a whole other thing. But I'm going to move off of that because it still managed to produce quite a bit of power because 1,000 psi is quite a bit. When I can add in multiple thousand psi. And then in and then out and then in and then out and then in and out. You know what I mean? So it's like, all right, so I have like, what is this again? Oh, and then my turbine. Yeah, no, I have my super cool turbine thing. Which I did a double floating. So it's like I have a housing, and then the housing that's spinning, those stators that are like hollow, you know what I mean? Like that then joins with those like the little seals. Anyways, point is then that'll rotate and then I'll rotate, and then those combine into one singular axle that then goes to like the standard Pelton, which goes from the side and then tries to go from the center. Except this time I was like, you know what? This is gonna need to be a bigger to a smaller, and anyways, and so it's like I'm just gonna have that go from forward, and then it's gonna go basically do a full counter, and then it's going to go from a small area, and then it'll slowly, because of stators that are there, allow it to open up to a larger until it comes out as a larger area. So it's a lower pressure, and technically a higher pressure at start, and then lower pressure at the end, and so that way I get more rotational efficiencies. Anyways, all of that combines into, you guessed it, the super turbo thing that I have going on, because it's a supercharger turbo with the generator, like the gearing for the supercharger, and then the turbo takes over, and then everything gets added into the axle crankshaft thing, which is now like super duper way higher degrees of torque than you think. In fact, it's kind of dangerous levels of torque. Because I was like, right, I could still increase the length of this. You know what I mean? Like, so they're the size and thickness of my thumb or some shit. I don't care. I have 12 of them. I want more torque. This is small. It's a tiny little freaking rotary. I need to be, it's small. Okay, I'm going to make this better. You have like 5,000 psi air spring. Yeah, it's fine. It'll get to that point where it'll use all of it. Meanwhile, they were not super happy, but it's 1,000 psi each. You know what I mean? And so, like, it's not really 5,000 psi. That's okay, sure. Anyways, it was like, here's 500 foot-pounds of torque at fucking 700 RPM. Let's go! It was so fast. I was like, I can easily turn this into something that's dangerous for most people. It's like, oh yeah, no, this is pretty darn decently balanced. It has almost no friction from side to side piston slap stuff. Which then turned it into like, so, you want like 6,000 RPM? What do you want? Because I have air spring on outside that slow down everything effectively. So what maybe you want? Please don't kill us. Brake mean effective pressure go way the hell up. Look at the size of the radiator. I was like, what's the fucking smallest radiator? Oh, I should probably get a bigger radiator. This is like a fucking 2x3, 2 foot by 3 foot radiator. That's the waste heat generator sort of thing. And I was like, this will work for my 49cc. And I was like, what's the actual RPM I could get out of this? And it's like, okay, so maybe I could do about 150,000. I could probably make 150,000. And then it's like, it's already making 500 fucking foot-pounds of torque, which is quite a high brake mean effective pressure. But not insane, not bomb level, because I have the 5,000 psi effectively version of my air spring. Giving it a artificially increased torque, like a bigger, much larger, ridiculously over the top sized flywheel. And so it's like, right, but what if 150K? No! And then it was like, oh, so people are dying left, right, and center, it turned out. This is dangerous. It wasn't even a joke anymore. It's like, there's no real way to make this safe, is there? Not really. Because it's like bang, bang, and then it has like a continuation with the flywheel and the vacuum, like crankshaft stuff. It's like that allows for it to then transfer a ridiculously large amount of its rotation. So it's like bang bang and then bang bang, and so it's like there's technically never, especially with the rocket exhaust that's in there, and I'm only ever exhausting, and so it's like, and then crankshaft is supplemented by exhaust pressures. And then it's like waste heat generator, but oh no, I'm not really actually done, because like here's electric motor and solenoids, because they're linear generator, which is now just going to be a solenoid if you really want to. Right. Uh, right, and it's like, yeah, more torqueys. So it's like, how crankshaft, angle when the actual power stroke happens, and they used to call it a big bang versus a screamer. Now it's a big bang screamer. So it's like bang bang. So it goes up, and then it goes up, and then it has a sustain at that top, and then it goes bang bang. And so it actually acts like an exponential, and it has to go down. And so it's like, all right, so let me just let that go down and not actually fire it for a second. I'll just run off of the pure 5,000 psi levels of bullshit fucking flywheel. Because there's nothing that says I can't just constantly keep adding, but it's like if I do it right, then it sustains and it goes down. But it's like, what if I did it with 4 packs of 3? And so it went bang bang, bang bang, bang bang, bang bang, and so it like constantly does that now. So it's like a big bang is what they used to call it, and then they turned it back into a screamer, so that way it always has a power rotation. Well, same kind of thing. It's like bang bang, but there's always a power rotation where it actually goes down. So it's like that little sideways flat line is perfectly flat because that's the flywheel and so on. So it's like that is where the bang, and then it goes back up and accelerates again with the next, outer, combustion, and then it has that go down to its final actual, because this is all about engine timing with the correct pressures that we're going to have. So it goes bang, and then it goes back up again, and then it goes... No phaser. It only goes down to, like, the flywheel area, and then it has to sustain that technically the most minimal amount of time it needs to. And so, like, that's however short that has to be, and then it goes back up to bang, and then that outer bang then goes to, so we weren't as bangy as we once were. We're just not going to put as much there, and so then it flatlines it, and then it goes back to, like, slightly goes down, and then it's flatlines, and so it's basically never-ending, like, an electric motor now. But then I have an electric motor, so it's like electric motor equals super flat. There are no curves. It's always on. Just flat power. What power do you want? Do you want digital increase like this, like sine wave? Because it's like it curves up and then it flattens at this, and then it goes back down to this. And it's like, this is the power you will have now all the time, no matter what. Like this power, that power, this power. And it's like, that's all you need all the time. It's like match it with the gear ratio for my CVTs. It's like, whee! I didn't know
Well, I wanted to die and have death wobble while I'm at like 4 miles an hour or some bullshit. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, look at me and my. It's only 49cc. This is an engine kit I sell on Amazon for your bikes and so on. Oh, bullshit! I'm out of here. I'm gonna die. And it's like, yep, no, that's just, it's fine. It's not that bad. It's only $1,000 first and foremost. It doesn't come with what you think. It comes with engine, the cooler, the waste heat generator, of course. But it's split, so that way, like, it covers your engine. Your engine's also cooling itself because engine cooler. Then I have, here's in the in-between, that's my suction-y ram air into my compressor, superchargers, all that stuffs. Here's the intake manifold cooler water to air. That goes in front of your, your two radiators. Here's your battery pack that you have. That's cool. It goes on the long bike post area. So just put it there. And underneath, because like this hangs underneath the fuel tank effectively, and then here's your transmission underneath that, which sits atop. So like they're all kind of one stack uniform. This is good for all of it. Structural support to your bike. Here's your gear teeth ratios for your tire. And here's your transmission that gives you all of the gears. Like, I have, like, so many gears. How many gears? I have, like, 43 gears with one reverse. That's it. 42 forward, one reverse. You don't need to really use reverse, but we put it in there because safety or some bullshit, something. Because safety bullshit, right? Yeah, that'll work. Here's your controller. It's right underneath your seat. Here are your batteries. They're over by your handlebars. So that's nice. Easy. They go technically a little bit towards your gas tank, which is a really large as fuck gas tank. I wanted to sell them a 30 fucking gallon gas tank, but they were not super happy about that, although they would need it considering. But it was like, all right, so I'm not done yet. Here's a 15-gallon gas tank, and then here's your gears to your rear, and here's like the specs, which are stupid. So here's something you might not like, because your ECU goes with your controller, and so like this is your phone as an ECU as an app here, and so like you plug in play effectively. You plug it in, it has an easy tune. It tries to detect the temperature, the altitude, so on like that to get you in the ballpark. And then here's where your like timing and pressures that you want that you'll have on your ECU and so on. And then it's like, right, but also you're a dumbass probably for buying this, because like it's like 500 foot-pounds of torque I can give you. And up to like 150,000 RPM, which it's set and definitely made very much not allowed or able to do that. All 49cc, by the way, so no need for insurance, no need for a license. You don't need any of that stuff. No. It's like, see how like ridiculously afraid most people will tend to become, and it's like for good reason, for what it's worth. Yeah. But it's like, there you go. It all fits within a standard bicycle, right? And it's like, I mean, fucking holy shit. It's $1,000, so it's probably gonna, weed out the vast majority of people. Because like you get all of that for $1,000, right? Well, you get the engine, and you get the cooler, and you get the compressor, and the turbines, all of that. You don't get the transmission. That's another $1,000.
said you get the transmission. You're probably going to buy the transmission because you've spent the 2,000, or in reality wise, the 1,500 if you buy them together. Okay, I see what you're doing. Well, here's $1,500, right? Yeah, okay, yeah, okay. It's not fit to any particular bike. These are sort of universal-ish. You know what I mean? It's like, well, there's a series of pipes and stuff, and then the other like little clamps and little things that make it so like that transmission fits to like the fucking ridiculous amount of down tubes that exist. And then like the spines and then the bike post tube area. Like there's so many, and versus hardtail versus like it'll fit most, and with relatively little modification because it's mostly unscrew, slide, screw back in, and then tighten and all that stuff. But it's like you're probably barking up the wrong tree if you expect me to be able to hit all of it. So it's like just be done with that. You're going to have to do some modifications. Also, this is a stupid engine that in a sports car is dangerous. Especially when it's like, it's a vacuum design. You know what I mean? And so they're like, no, a vacuum could do that, I'm sure. Here's your 5,000 psi. When you put them all together, 1,000 psi each individually. Flywheel spring thing. So have fun with that. Look at the thickness of this bad boy. No one mentioned it. While it's long, it has to be thick to handle those PSI pressures of the brake mean effective pressures inside of the cylinder that is being, used. Especially with all the electricity captured. The piezoelectric, the thermoelectric, the thermophotovoltaic, which it's going to want that because of heat. Thermophotovoltaic and thermoelectric wants heat. And it's like, oh, no, I can manage the heat, that's fine. Yeah, no, well, dear Lord, right? And it's like, oh, no, so that makes sense why you have a 2 foot by 3 foot fucking goddamn split waste heat generator radiator with a fucking water to air at the top here for that fucker. Yeah, with the rocket injectors. So it's like, like you think that I can't do it, I can do it. But it's like 49cc going off as one cylinder, and then technically speaking, it's not for the second one, which is more like almost double. It's 1.6 of that for the outside, and then that then has like the electric motor helping, which is a part of the axle and then housing part, and then the solenoid to help it all out, batteries and so on. And there's got to be an alternator, which is waste heat generator and all the rest of it. See what I'm saying? Like that's an alternator now. It's like, have fun with your tires not handling that. They're not gonna handle that well. I can already see it. It's like, well, it's $1,500. You give us brakes and stuff, right? Nope. What? No, I don't. Nope, not even a single bit. Dear Lord, no! Nope, don't. And I'm not going to. Here's a transmission I have to make for you. Here's a bunch of gears that have to handle with my patented vacuum gearing system. That's why they're tubes and they're sealed. So it weighs less, because I don't like that weight, man. And that heat is annoying, and that's why they have heat sinks, kind of, technically speak. They're really just ruffles, long areas for heat sink fins on that, yeah. So that way they stay consistently cold, and they're sealed. So fuck chain problems, right? Lubrication? Sure. Yeah, that's something I'll need to do eventually, but unlikely for a really long time if I'm being honest. Considering the way that I don't use an O-ring, I use an entirely different setup that has blow-by go back into the outside of the air, because there isn't really technically blow-by per se, if you really look at that. It's vacuum, double vacuum. The area in between, that's the real actual kind of like pressurized area. But since, blow by is going to happen, except I don't want that, so what does it do? It goes outside to the air, because the air pressure around you is the air pressure that you get for your blow by. You see what I'm going for here? It's double vacuum, only diaphragm and center. Blow by goes atmosphere, no problems anymore. Kind of, eventually. You will have a wear rate, and so, like, here's some fucking lubrication, and it's done now. It'll last for a long time, and I don't care anymore. Anyways, bike tire go, oh my god, scary fast. Because it's like, actually, yeah. But it's like, no. This also fits scooters. This is upgrade to 50cc scooter. Oh, is it? It's an upgrade? Yes, have fun. I don't know what to fucking do. Jesus. Here's your little pit bike lane thing. Do you wish to see death? Maybe tone it back from 500 foot-pounds, because, like, that's max. It's like, here's the max all or nothing button. That's literally what your ECU will time. It'll time it to, like, max everything. Or, here's basically about the ballpark you're going to see, depending on the size of tires and so on that you've got. Roughly-ish. Within a 5 to 10, maybe 15 horsepower at most. Jeez. It's like, yeah, so, jeez, and that's why it's like, oh, that's cool, but, like, that's dangerous. And it's like, yes. Or, now it's a personal flying vehicle. Whee! Because I still have the toroidal engine that I have, because they're all donuts to me, basically. Which is a whole other thing. I'm not even kidding, like, for real. But yeah, no, like, they're toroidal. So it's like, if it spins like that, then it's like, well, I can do kind of a similar story to a degree, but not fully. So, like, that's a whole other thing. And then that allows for me to be able to ultimately put in a far more balanced, much higher horsepower, because of higher RPM engine together in a much smaller package without a need for, like, the level of, vacuum and oscillating pistons. Instead, it just rotates faster and it continues. So it's like, well, that's neat, but then this I like more. That's cool, but this, you know what I mean? So anyways, I have to pee. This is done. Bye.